Good. We're live.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the Monomoy Regional School District, Monomoy Regional School Committee budget hearing. This meeting is being held fully remotely in accordance with the Governor of Massachusetts, March 12th, 2020 order, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, GLC 30A, section 20. It is Thursday, February 11th at 6:03 p.m. And I am going to call to order our budget hearing. So I'm going to go around for school committee members. And when I call your name, just say your name and present. Carrie, we will start with you.
Gary Russell, present.
Thank you. Joanne?
Joanne Sheehan, present.
Thank you. Nancy?
Nancy Scott, present.
Thank you. Meredith?
Meredith Henderson, present.
Thank you. Joe?
Joe Osceola, present.
Thank you. Sharon?
Sharon Stout, present.
Thank you. Jackie?
Jackie Long, present.
Thank you. And Tina Gaines, present. In accordance with MGLC 71, section 38N, this is a public hearing for the proposed annual budget for fiscal year 2022. The purpose of the public hearing is to present the FY22 Monomoy Regional School District budget to the community for their input. Welcome everyone this evening. And before I turn it over, am I turning it over to Scott or Michael? Which one?
Well, we're going to get started. Scott's going to get started, but I'm going to put the slides up. So
okay, perfect. And so before we do that, I just want to say to everybody, we're going to break this into 3 parts this evening. So we're going to go with part 1 and we'll pause and take any questions or comments from the public, just to kind of let you know how we're going to do this. And if you have a question, you can just put your hand up. When I see it, I'll call on you for your question. So Scott and Michael, I will now turn it over to you for the first part of the presentation.
Thank you.
All right. So can you see the slides?
I can see the slides just fine.
Great.
So, the way Michael and I will do this is I'll just give a quick overview of where we are, and Michael will do the bulk of the presentation, and he and I will sort of tag team on the questions that folks ask. So if we take our 30,000-foot view on on the upcoming FY22 budget, the one thing that we don't quite know what the impact is going to be is COVID. We are presuming, and what we presume and have put in place behind this budget is we presume that by September we'll be back to a relative normal, a pre-COVID normal. We can only hope. There is some small, relatively speaking, some small amounts of money that are still embedded in the budget in terms of a little extra nursing staff, presuming that we still might need some of that post-COVID. Enrollment in the district continues to slowly track down, and it continues to be the same trend. We're projecting that Chatham Elementary will be having a slow decline. Harwich will have a slow decline, but the decline that we're seeing in Chatham continues to exceed or outpace Harwich. In terms of programs, there's no reduction in programs or services here. So everything that, and again, I think if we conceptually think of what were our schools like prior to COVID, because this has been a very odd year, but everything that we had in place prior to COVID, we'll be bringing, intend on bringing all of those things back. So this is a level budget in terms of program. And then the assessments, the assessment is the bill that the school district sends to each town. Last night there was a good joint board meeting between the Harwich Board and Chatham Board of Selectmen and the Regional School Committee. So we're discussing whether there is a way to have potentially better equity in that assessment, particularly on how the elementary school budgets hit that, hit the assessment. So that's under review, and those discussions continue. So I will turn things over to Michael, and we'll be happy to answer your questions when we hit each of the pause points.
All right, thank you very much, Superintendent. So just before we get started, I just wanted to point out that this slide pack that we're presenting this evening is available on the website, and we have the high level information is in the slides, as you're seeing, but we also have a lot of detail and a lot of notes that accompany those slides. So, and some of which we'll cover, but some are additional to what we'll present here. So if you're looking for more information, then that's a good place to start. So it's on the website. You just go to district website, and under school committee, under budget information, you can find all the documentations relating to the budget. So just in terms of the structure that Tina outlined, the chair, sorry, outlined, we're going to go through this in 3 parts. So there are kind of 3 parts that contribute to the budget. The first is looking at our total planned expenditure for the year ahead. So looking at really kind of building on the current year and seeing what the priorities and focus will be for the following year helps to inform what our planned expenditure is. And then we look at how we're going to fund that expenditure. And the biggest part of that comes from our general fund operating budget, or general fund budget. But we also have revenue from school choice and circuit breaker, and also state and federal grants, all of which I'm going to go into more detail throughout this presentation. And then finally, once we have those figures, we look at how we're going to fund that budget through the assessment process. So that this area in grey then gets funded through the Chatham and Harwich assessment and the general fund revenue and state aid. So you kind of work out how much we're going to spend, how we're going to pay for it, and how we're going to do the assessments of each town. And now this is the way how we're going to present it. Of course, in reality, it's an iterative process, and there's a lot of interaction between all 3 of these parts, but it's helpful to think about it in this way for tonight. So the first part is the planned expenditure. So these are kind of, from a high level, these are kind of key elements that drive a budget, and I'm going to go through each of these in more detail. The first is the district's mission, which is to be a community of learners of all ages focused on building knowledge, positive character, and resiliency in a safe, supportive, creative, and challenging environment. I just thought it was interesting that one of those elements is safe, and obviously that's been a big focus this year, and creating a safe environment for students as we've continued teaching in school during COVID-19 has been a big focus, but still in line with the mission of the district. And then under the strategic plan, we're looking at community engagement, social and emotional well-being, closing the achievement gap, and improving curriculum, instruction, assessment for all learners. All elements that you'll see reflected in the priorities that we talk about as we get into the budget. So student enrollment. So just before I go on, so this chart, let me see if I can just use I'm going to leave a pointer here. So I just want to explain this chart briefly. So this line here is the grand total of enrollment in the district, and that's actually measured on this axis on the right, whereas the other ones are all the school enrollment, and they're measured on the axis on the left. So the reason for that is just so you can see them all at the same time in a kind of meaningful way. But as you can see, since 2017, the overall enrollment has actually been relatively level until 2021, and part of that is definitely driven by COVID and parents choosing not to send their students to school if they had the option. This thing does include, just to be clear though, this does include students who are remote learning, but it doesn't include people who have not chosen to enroll their students here. So we have seen a reduction. However, it's a more complex picture that's underneath that, where we have the high school increasing and the elementary schools really seeing the biggest dip. And as the superintendent highlighted, it's the Chatham Elementary School where the dip has been the greatest. So one of the district's goals is to maintain programs and class sizes, and the class size goal is 19 plus or minus 2 students per class at middle and high school, and 18 plus or minus 1 at the elementary level. So despite with that falling enrollment, we've managed to we're keeping it within those ranges of class sizes. And in the notes, we've broken this down by grade, so you can see exactly what a class size we're expecting by grade, but we are still living up to that goal. And so we have that goal of class size, and we also have a goal priorities, which the principals and directors have identified in terms when they're looking at how best to implement the district's strategic plan. They've identified a number of priorities, and we as a group went through those and identified which would be able to fund this year, and as I'll come on to in a moment, which we'll be able to fund next year. And you know, I just thought it's helpful to highlight a couple of these. So there's we have here these are not in order, by the way, they're not in any particular order, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of them. One is the additional full-time nurse. So we hired an additional full-time nurse this year in response to the coronavirus pandemic, and we believe we're going to continue to need that additional health support going into next year. And then also, and this comes back to the strategic plan objectives, we're hoping to budget a math interventionist at the high school and a reading specialist at the middle school. And that's all about, you know, improving curriculum and instruction and closing the achievement gap by providing targeted support. So as I said, unfortunately, so we identified all the needs or the priorities for the budget, but we're not able to fund them all. And these are the ones we have not funded as of yet. And again, some of the ones I'd highlight are the one I definitely know the ones that as a administrative team that we've been focused on are the team chair for out of district. So that's team chair, which is a role in special education and oversees out of district, Chatham Elementary School and early childhood. And at the moment, those duties are spread amongst people already here, but we'd like to have a particular position for that. In addition, the speech and language 0.5 FTE and the special education teacher at the high school. Those are all positions which we believe are still critical. I mean, all these are important, but working, and you know, we will look for means to fund some of these if we're able to identify other means of savings within the budget, or grant or other funding opportunities that we identify. So this list is still very live, and we are trying to fund these, but they're not in the budget at the moment. So, I think so. We've talked about enrollment and some of the priorities, and the biggest driver for the district is really staffing. So if you take all our staff pay plus health insurance, you know, and other, you know, other related benefits, that's about over 70%, just over 70% of our budget. So that's a huge part of our budget. And that in each year we have, most of the collective bargaining agreements have steps in them, or they all have steps, and some of them have columns. So as staff progress either in a longevity here or in their qualifications, they can move and increase their pay. So that's all built into the budget. However, what I've highlighted here is staffing changes that we have planned. And so this year, there were a number of positions we did not fill as we were responding to COVID-19. We didn't need them, and we used those funds to fund positions that were important for this year. So there were 6.5 positions that we did not fill in FY21 that we are not planning to bring back in FY22. So those positions won't be missed next year because we don't have them this year. We've already taken them out of the budget. And then there were 4.6 positions which we have been filled this year, but they're not planned for FY22. The bulk of those are driven by enrollment at the elementary schools and just a refocusing some other areas. But we are also adding, and I went through a few of those, 4.5 new positions that are aligned with the district strategic plan and aim to meet the needs that the principals have identified. And you know, there is an interaction between these two. So some of the positions we are not filling in FY21 are helping into FY22, are helping to pay for some of the new ones that we wish to add. So it's really about refocusing the budget to match the priorities that principals have identified. And there are positions which we hired this year, 1-year positions in response to COVID, which will not be filled in FY22. except as I noted earlier, the nursing position, which is in one of the priorities we identified. So this slide wasn't in the original packets, but the information was in the notes, and I just brought it back up. I've presented this to school committee before, but I noticed I didn't notice, one of our eagle-eyed audience members out there noticed that some of these charts have got jumbled up in some of the slide packs. So I just wanted to be clear. So the blue table is the positions that were unfilled this year and will be not budgeted next year. Orange is the positions that are filled this year, but we're not planning for next year. And the green are the new positions, and that tie up with the previous slide. All right, so I mean, this is, I'm going through the whole budget. There's a lot in these budgets, so I know I'm going quick and covering a lot of ground, but we've got the enrollment, and that's and the enrollment is affecting our staffing positions, as is the priorities that the principals and directors have identified. There are other items in the budget which are big enough on their own to impact the overall budget. And I just wanted to highlight some of these because they're often a forefront in people's minds. So school choice and charter tuition. And this right now I'm talking about expenditure. I'm going to talk about revenue related to these later, right? But right now, in terms of expenditure, we have to pay for students who live in the district but choose to attend either in a public school district or a charter school. And then again, there's more information in here. We pay about a little over $5,000 for each school choice out student, and around $18,000, although it changes a little, for each charter student. So these numbers have moved around a lot in the last couple of years. We were seeing this coming down a little, and then they went down more as we saw with COVID, but exactly how they're going to respond next year isn't 100% clear. So we've kind of taken a safe approach. We've level budgeted what was budgeted this year, which has been right about the right amount for both of these. And so we're just going to keep it level as we see what happens next year. And they should, between the two of them, be enough to cover both pools. Then we have out-of-district tuition. So out-of-district tuition is money that we pay for students whose needs are such that we are unable to educate them within the district. And so we pay schools, special education schools outside of the district to provide their education. We have we are expecting to see a small, although there's actually quite a lot of movement within the group, where it's only over, the net increase is a small increase. However, we do receive funding from the state called Circuit Breaker, which I will come onto again, which helps to offset some of these costs. And as a result, the net impact on the budget is actually a small decrease of around $70,000, I think. So, the costs are going up, but the reimbursement, the offsetting revenue has gone up as well. So the net impact on the budget is a saving. So we are still paying for the construction of the high school. That's still going on, and that will go on to like 2045, I think, or something like that, some ways out from now. However, there was a couple of strands to those costs. One is the long-term debt. That's what's going on. We had some short-term debt, and that just rolled off. We made the final payment on that this year, and so we've seen a decrease there. And finally, health insurance. So we are members of the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group. And, as you can see here, health insurance is 5.4 million, so it's a big part of our budget. And the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group has done a great job of managing the fund for organizations on the Cape. And although we are going to see an increase of between 2 and 3%, depending on the plan, there is going to be what's called a premium holiday, where 1 month they will not charge employers or employees for the health insurance premiums. Instead, that will be paid from the reserve funds that the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group has. So that's helping to add savings to the budget. And that's the big change for school committee members or anyone else who's been paying attention to the last version you saw of the budget. That's the big change, is we saw that a health insurance reduction, which has helped to bring our budget down. And last time you saw it was around 1.5%, and that's what's helped to bring it just under 1%. All right. just one more slide and then we'll take a break. So we've had the other part of the key part of the budget is to our capital needs. So there's like two kind of buckets we put our capital in. There's facilities and technology. All the technology costs right now are ongoing leases. So these are leases that were started prior to FY22 and we're just paying the next payment. Some are lease to own, some are just a lease or pure leases. So these are all ongoing. Then in terms of our facilities, so we have a kind of capital planning process whereby we review all our buildings, we identify all our needs, we have a long list. We then review it with our administration team and identify the priorities. So we have in here a number of items which are critical or which have been prioritized by the district. And also included in here is a stabilization payment. So we continue to follow the policy that was a practice that started a couple of years ago by the district, but we deposit $50,000 or we budget to put $50,000 in a stabilization fund. It's not really capital, but also this just reminds me, we also have our OPEB funds. So we continue to pay $100,000, we're budgeted to pay $100,000 into an OPEB fund to help offset a post-employment benefits. All right, so that's really the big drivers for how we've set the budget for the total planned expenditure for this year. So we have that ongoing impact from COVID. Enrollment is down, and that has helped make some changes. And our programs, there's no reductions in programs, but we have added some key positions, but there are still some unmet needs. All right, we're ready for some questions on what we've seen so far.
Thank you, Michael. So those of you in the public, if you have a question, please raise your hand. I'm scrolling through. If you have a question, I'm going to go back through again. And for those of you that are off camera, you can put yourself on camera and just hold your hand up. Charles, go ahead.
Madam Chair, are you taking only questions at this time or are comments appropriate, or should comments?
Questions and comments for this particular section, yes.
Very good. I do have some comments. I'd like to start by thanking and commending the administration for including in their budget report a total list of the identified needs of the district, those that could be funded under this budget, those that right now are unfunded. And by the way, for all the non-committee people or people in the community, there's a tremendous amount of detail in the budget report that we're seeing slides on here that on the website, and I highly recommend folks go into the website to get all that additional detail. I'm responding to some of because of some of the detail that I do have. Many school administrations, many school committees don't get to see all of the needs of the district when the budget is presented. Usually those are filtered out, and what comes to the school committee initially is a realistic budget rather than a budget that reflects all the needs of the district. If I had had my druthers, I would have had the administration submit an original budget that included all the unfunded priorities recognized by the administration as a starting budget, saying realistically, I don't think we're going to be able to get this through the taxpayers of Harwich at their town meeting, but this is a budget that reflects the needs. But you can add those needs up, and I have, and they come to over $620,000 on that list. And so that tells me that this budget is starting with a $620,000 shortfall of meeting the needs of the district at this time. But I'm so grateful that we see what these needs are so that the school committee can take a look at these needs and with the administration and see what, if anything, can be done and keep them on. Now, the ones that are unfunded originally were presented as priority 3 and priority 4 needs. And that doesn't mean that for the administrator who submitted these, and probably on behalf of their staff, if they were principals as well, it wasn't the #1 priority need. So some of these unfunded needs may be 3 or 4 in the list of all the needs, but they're #1 in some places. I've taken a look at these needs along with some commentary that isn't in the latest report. In a previous report, the administration submitted a column that described the impact of not funding and the mitigation efforts for not funding these particular areas. And certain ones have jumped out at me, and I feel a need as a citizen taxpayer with a great concern for top quality education in the district to point these out to the committee and the administration. Some of them are the ones that Mr. McMillan had just said that the administration is already highlighting and looking at ways to attack. And one of the ones I had noted was the team chair for out of district Chatham Elementary and early childhood, I have a lot of experience, my own experience being a team chair. And in the mitigation impact column on the last report, it was stated that the caseload for the current Chatham Elementary, Harwich Elementary team chair will be approximately 140 students. I've held that role for several years. That is an overwhelming caseload, in my opinion. I think this is a real top priority need. I think that's a very important position in terms of parents of the district, the special needs students. That role is a very important role to those families, and that role plays that is a key role in making sure the parents fully understand the process, the goals, their priorities. And so I point that out. I certainly wish that there could be a way to fund that position. I also took note of special education teacher at the high school, and I was really concerned about the statement, the impact statement in the last report, which said students are not being placed properly with increased caseloads. Again, that's again a major concern of mine. It has legal implications. I think it's something that we have to make sure it isn't happening. And I think that is a very high priority need for the district. And I'm concerned that right now it's not accounted for in the budget. In addition, there were a couple of other things that I noted. One was the security cameras for Chatham Elementary and Monomoy Middle School. Safety is our first concern all the time. And safety and security, I think it was alluded to even in the presentation tonight and within the strategic plan, always in the mission of the schools, $12,000 to get security cameras operating properly at Chatham Elementary School and the middle school in a $41 million budget. It would seem that there's some way to find $12,000 because the costs of a breach in security, whether it's the physical safety of students or property of the district, even though we have insurance, I'm sure, it certainly needs to be a concern. And it would seem like $12,000 is a wise investment to avoid or do all we can to avoid some type of tragedy, both human or property. Another area that I noted was the guidance administrative assistant days for the high school. I did spend 8 years in guidance myself. The impact of that has to do with really orienting and welcoming students in the summer months. And that's always been a priority of mine. I think it should be a priority of all schools, understanding the anxiety that's centered around a student entering school, a new school for the first time. That's a $10,600 item, again, in a budget of $41 million. I think that's a very important role based on experience. And finally, the new math interventionist for the Chatham Elementary School. I didn't know much about that position. I noted that the budget calls for increasing the role of the math assistant at Chatham Elementary School from part-time to full-time. So I inquired as to more information of the administration on what the math interventionist position would be all about. And that question was referred to Principal Millen at the Chatham Elementary School, who I thought had an extremely well thought out and strong argument for this position, a position that has been requested for several years now in the budget input process. Now, I see so much more benefit to if we really need help in the math area at Chatham Elementary, and according to the principal, we do, and COVID has exacerbated that situation. And right now, the responsibility for overseeing that kind of role is with the principal, who oversees the math assistant. But you could deduct the math assistant from the budget and come up with close to half of the funds needed for a math interventionist, perhaps getting a bigger bang, getting a bigger bang for the buck. It would be a professional role. It would be a specialist role. We have a lot of generalists, which are very, very important at the elementary level. And math is one of the foundational areas, math and literacy in the early grades. So I just want to give that input as an individual from the community, as a taxpayer helping to fund this budget, that I think those positions that are going unfunded, from my perspective, should be a high priority. And I asked the school committee to make them a high priority and take a very close look at this unfunded detail page. Difficult thing to do given the financial situation of the towns. I was present virtually at the meeting last evening, but I provide that input. And if it were another year, I'd say at this point, I'm pleading with the school committee to put those positions into the budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles. Anybody else with a question or a comment? I'm scrolling through. Just put your hand up. And for those of you off camera, just turn your camera on. Okay, I am seeing no hands. So go ahead, Michael, with your next part.
All right, thank you very much. And I just thank you to Charles for his comments. I mean, that's, whether districts present it or not, there's always unfunded priorities for districts, and there's always that kind of a analysis, and it's exactly the kind of things that you brought up, Charles, like trying to decide which things to fund. And that's what the kind of conversations that are going on inside the district. So, and we'll take away what you said and go back and look again at our list, and and go back through everything. And we're constantly having those kind of conversations to try and determine which items should be funded and which shouldn't, which we'll have to wait. All right, so back to my slide. Fine, there we go. So the next is a short section now, actually. So it just talks about, I'm just going to talk about budgeted revenue. So this is back to, so we've worked out how much we want to spend, and it's like how we're going to pay for it. So the big part of how we're going to pay for it is the general fund budget, which is going to come through the assessment process. But the other part of it, of funding that expenditure, is from offsetting revenue we receive from a few different places. And I want to highlight them here. So this chart shows kind of some of the key funds that help to offset our budget on the left, and then how much we've been able to expend from those funds from 2017 through to 2020, and how much we budgeted this year and how much we've budgeted for next year. So the biggest by far is school choice. So you remember I mentioned school choice is a big expenditure. It's also a big revenue. And actually for many years, Monomoy has been a net benefiter of school choice. So we receive more school choice revenue than we have to expend. And, again, I'm kind of taking a safe approach and just budgeting what we had budgeted this year, budgeting that again in terms of revenue. I mean, we had been seeing an increase, and COVID has kind of reduced that. So this is students who are coming into our district from other districts. We had been seeing an increase in the amount of money we're receiving through that program. Fell off this year, or at least the numbers have fallen off this year. Hopefully it will bounce back after we get through this year and we're back to in-person learning and COVID is in the rear view mirror. But for now, we're just going to assume it stayed kind of around where we thought it would be for this year. Circuit breaker is money that we receive from the state in reimbursement of expenditure over a certain threshold on special education costs. And the way it works is we spend the money in year one, and we submit a reimbursement request to the state, and they give us the money in year two. And then we use that reimbursement to offset the budget in year three. So you have a sort of 3-year cycle where the original expenditure, the reimbursement, and then the offsetting revenue. So the money we've offset the 2022 budget is money that we're receiving this year based on expenditure from last year. So I don't know if anyone's still with me out there, but that's roughly how it works. But so this year we're receiving more money than we have in the past, and that's because we spent more money in the previous year than we have in the past. So we're able to budget $400,000, which is an increase of $110,000 on last year's the amount that was budgeted for this year. And so if you remember when I was talking about out-of-district tuition, that has actually gone up a little bit by about $40,000, but because our offsetting revenue has gone up by about $100,000, we have a net benefit to the budget of about $70,000. So then IBEA and Title I, there are big two federal grants that we get and that pay for a lot of critical components within the district, programs and positions within the district. They operate a little differently from things like school choice and circuit breaker because they supplement the budget rather than supplanting it. So if we didn't have those funds, a lot of the programs would not be able to happen. Whereas if we didn't have the circuit breaker funds, we'd still have to spend it on, we'd still have all those needs that we currently have under circuit breaker. But nevertheless, IDA, as you can see, between them, IDA, which is primarily was for special education needs, and a Title I, which is primarily academic and low income related. Between them, they are almost, $600,000. So that's a significant portion of our budget of funding the programs we have in the district. The other ones, I just wanted to highlight. So the Make Way for Kids program, that used to be kind of on either side of the ledger. So we used to receive some money through that program, and when we'd spend it on expenditure, so we're no longer running that program. So we don't have the expenditure, but we also don't have that offsetting revenue. And the athletic revolver, so we do normally raise funds through athletics from like games, attendance, and so on. But given this year, although we budgeted $20,000 for this year, we've had very little revenue this year because of we've not been having games and so on. And so we haven't budgeted any revenue to offset next year's budget, just while we let that settle and come back to normality for that. But so overall, so you can see, so it's actually, so although this dark line is the overall budget, and again, that's on a different axis that's measured over here. And so you can see that it dipped from 2020 to 21. That's primarily because these years of expenditure, our actual revenue in these 2 years are budgeted. So the actual revenue is what we hope is actually normally slightly more than what we budget. So then the budget is a little less. And because with the help of circuit breaker, we're able to budget more going into 2022. All right. So this all we've talked about so far kind of gets us to where we are, which is we've worked out our total expenditure, which is the blue block that was here. We've worked out what parts of it can be funded through school choice and circuit breaker, and what grants are going to pay for this year. And that leaves us with the grey section, which is our general fund budget. And the budget figure for this year, for FY22, in the current proposal, is $41,669,545. And that is just shy of a 1% increase from FY21. Again, and there's more detail included in the slides. There's so many different ways you can cut this, but that gives you a sense of where we are. So I can stop and take questions again now, if you like. I know it's we just had a break a minute ago, but we still have some uncertainty due to COVID, but we're assuming largely level unless we know otherwise, as in circuit breaker. And overall, that's all that expenditure, this little bit of the grants and so on, is given as a 0.99% increase.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we will just take a brief pause here to see if there are any questions. We do have one more segment to go. So if you have a question, I'm scrolling through, members of the public, just hold your hand up and I will call, and we're taking questions for segment 2. I don't see any hands. So Michael, we can move ahead to segment 3.
Okay, so now this is where we get into the assessments. So I'll just recap. So I did the total expenditure. We worked out how much was the budget, which is the gray line, and then we have to work out how that gets split between Chatham and Harwich. And before we do that, we see general fund revenue and state aid that offsets the assessments. So the way the assessments work, well, I'll do the next slide first, actually. So first of all, we look at the general fund revenue and state aid, and that is this pie chart just shows that the bulk of that is from Chapter 70. So Chapter 70 is funds that the state gives each town, or each district, to help get them to a certain level of funding for what the state sees as the minimum level required to meet educational standards. It's a complicated budget, a complicated process to come up with that number, but and it has been going up. We've seen small increases just in line with increases in the overall state budget. So then the other major parts of this offsetting amount is transportation aid. So as a regional district, we get funds from the state to help with our transportation costs. So there's actually within our assessment, there's actually two parts to our transportation aid. There's how much we're budgeting for this year. So we think we're going to get X $100,000 next year. And then if there's a surplus, so if we actually receive more than we thought, we're able to use that for a future to offset a future year's budget. So there's a kind of the current or the forecast aid, but then there's also prior aid that we still have that we're able to spend. And that's what makes up that chunk. The other biggest chunk is our excess and deficiency fund. So that is, so basically at the end of each year, so any unreserved balance that we have left, so that's basically a surplus or deficit left in our fund, gets certified by Department of Revenue, and once that's done, we're allowed to use as much portion of it to offset the next year's budget. And so our proposal at the moment is to use $500,000 from our excess and deficiency to offset next year's budget. And then there's some other pieces of revenue in here. Charter school reimbursement, which is money the state gives us to help offset primarily increases to charter school reimbursement, charter school tuition. So if you remember back when we were talking about expenditure, we had that big chunk of over $1 million being spent on tuition costs for charter schools. So as that changes, as that increases, the state gives you a portion back over 3 years to help soften the blow of the increase. In recent years, we've not seen increases, so the reimbursement we get is getting less because we're not having that increase softened anymore. And we also receive funds from Medicaid. That's for providing certain medical services to students in the district, and then interest on our bank accounts and other miscellaneous revenue like rent. All right, so now I'm going to talk about, I'm actually going to back a slide just so I'm going to talk about how, so we've looked at this, and if it was at $5.3 million, I will go into it in a bit more detail, but the general fund and revenue and state aid is at $5 million, and that's down from last year. But there's also, so when we look at the assessment, like the assessment is, a fairly complicated process, but the first thing we do is each town has to pay their minimum local contribution. So the state looks at each town's enrollment and their ability to pay, and they set a minimum contribution for each town. And then after that's been paid, everything that's left that's still required, we have another process for separating that out. But here is the minimum local contribution for each town. So we have two graphs, two charts here, one for Chatham and one for Harwich. And there's two things on each chart. The orange lines are the required minimum contribution set by the state that figures in our assessment. And the biggest part of that is driving any changes right now is foundation enrollment. So I've also included a line here to show you the foundation enrollment. So it's in Chatham, it makes sense, right? So you see this, the foundation enrollment is going down, and so the required minimum contribution is also going down. Where it gets more complicated is with Harwich, because what they're seeing is their enrollment is going down, but their required minimum contribution has is either stayed level or actually it's gone up a little bit this year by $89,000. So when we start off our assessment process, the first thing that happens is Chatham pays about $200,000 less than they did last year, and Harwich pays $90,000 more. So that's the minimum local contribution, and that's set by the state. And it's driven by foundation enrollment, foundation enrollment is different from regular enrollment in that it includes every student who lives in the town for whom the district is financially responsible. So that includes everybody who's coming here, but it also includes students who attend charter schools and the other public district schools that we're paying for. Okay, so that was it. So I'm just going to now go through it. So those are the kind of key parts I wanted to make you aware of related to the assessment. So I'm going to do through the assessment process one step at a time. So we have the budget. We start with the budget, which we've already talked about, which is 41.6 million. Then we have a forecast offset. So this is this general fund revenue and state aid. And as I said, this is about $3.5 million, which is 166,000 down from last year. So you start with, what was it? A 41.6 million, subtract from that the 5.3 million, and what's left is what gets split between the two towns. And here's how it gets split. So first of all, you take that local minimum contribution that I mentioned. And for Harwich, that was 13.2 million. It was an 89,000 increase from FY21. For Chatham, it's 3.8 million, which is $334,000 decrease from 21. And then the remaining operating assessment, so that's all the operating costs, which is basically everything except transportation, capital, and debt. So everything else gets split up also based on foundation enrollment, but we use a 3-year average foundation enrollment. So that means it kind of softens any significant year-to-year changes because it's an average. And so then the foundation enrollment splits up the operating assessment. And then we use the foundation enrollment for capital as well, which also includes a stabilization payment and debt. Transportation is based on actual enrollment which makes sense because we're talking about paying for transportation for the students who are actually here, not students who we're responsible for. So that's why transportation is based on a slightly different percentage. And our transportation costs overall were down, well, actually it's more, we have an increase in our aid assumption that we're assuming for transportation aid, mostly because our prior year a surplus has gone up. But so that's why they're down. And the debt's down because of, if you remember when we were talking about the high school construction project, our financing costs there have come down, and so that's applied to both the town's debt. And so then we come out here at these assessment figures. So Harwich is assessed at 21.6, almost 7 million. It's an $847,000 increase, and Chatham is 8.6 million, sorry, which is a 272,000 decrease. So, I mean, the overall increase to the assessment is something in the region of 500 and something thousand, but Harwich's has gone up 800 and Chatham's is coming down. So that is almost everybody here, I think, will be aware, has led to some discussions between the Chatham Board of Select Board, the Harwich Board of Selectmen, and the school committee about how might we approach the assessment method differently. And this is just one, this is an example, this is kind of the one we're looking at the moment, which is, so you take out the local minimum contribution, as we did in the last one, each town pays that, but then each town pays for its own elementary school. So Harwich pays for the Harwich Elementary School and Chatham pays for the Chatham Elementary School. And because the Chatham Elementary School is a greater portion of the elementary school budget than the Chatham Foundation enrollment percentage, that increases Chatham's assessment. And everything else is the same, but your operating assessment, which you are now splitting up, is less because you've already taken out the elementary school costs. And so then these items are all the same, but you end up with an increase of $240,000 for Harwich, just 1.27%, and $234,000 increase for Chatham. So, there's two ways to look at that number. One is it's a $234,000 increase from FY21, but it's also something like $500,000 increase from what they might otherwise have paid under the previous assessment methodology. So those conversations are ongoing right now under the current methodology. This is how the numbers play out. And then I'll just add one last piece of information, which is that when the state released its budget this year, the first version of the budget, House 1 budget, one of the things they said is that municipalities can use some of the grant money that schools have received to offset increases to their minimum local contribution. So this number here. So if I go back, so again, there's a complicated formula, but basically, because the increase for Harwich is just $89,000, and a lot of the problem isn't due to the increase, it's due to the decrease. But because the increase is $89,000, Harwich can use $89,000 of grant money that the district has received to count towards its minimum contribution. So that will soften the blow a tiny bit for Harwich by bringing down their assessment down by just shy of $90,000. All right, that's it. That's all the information I plan to share. So I know there's a ton more detail and you may have other questions, but I kind of wanted to give you the highlights in a way that might keep you awake till 7 o'clock.
Thank you, Michael. So we're now at the end of the presentation, and I'm going to scroll through for any of our public who are here tonight with questions or comments. And you can hold your hand. Let me just scan. Charles, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think I gave my address the first time. Charles Gruska, 6 Teaberry Ave, Harwich. One other position that I forgot to highlight when I was highlighting important positions in the unfunded category was one also that the administration has targeted, which is the speech and language therapist, the addition of a half-time position. Again, that's a benefit to Chatham Elementary School. My experience tells me that having a full-time therapist in the building has an awful lot of benefit for every student, every class in that building, for the utilization of that therapist in educating staff and working with other students even outside of the SPED domain in their roles. So I have that down as well. Looking at the assessments, again, I viewed last evening's meeting of the joint meeting of the select boards and the school committee. I viewed the Harwich Selectmen's meeting on Monday, where the town manager gave his budget report and budget forecast. And I was at the last indoor annual town meeting held in Harwich, where the voters that year just barely passed the town budget, something that's been unprecedented in my dozens and dozens of town meetings I've attended over my lifetime. That was a red flag. That was a clarion call that from the Harwich perspective, things are very difficult. So I'm hoping that $89,000 of COVID funds can maybe support some of those items that were pointed out on the unfunded benefits, maybe the position, definitely the security cameras. But I don't feel as I would in other years to plead with the committee to, fund that full budget, because when you've got a situation of a 0.99% budget increase generating a 3.16% assessment increase for my town, it tells me, with everything else I've heard, that the time has come. We've hit the wall. We're at the tipping point, and there's something amiss that's got to be looked at in the assessment process. So kudos to everyone that's working on that now. And I don't have all the answers, but what I'm seeing here is there's a lot of interest in Chatham Elementary School in this whole discussion. And I'm seeing a lot of positions not being funded that would benefit Chatham Elementary School, because Harwich is going to have difficulty funding this budget. Even with the alternative assessment method, I'm wondering if Harwich is going to be able to afford that 1.37% increase if that doesn't come down. That's only my opinion. I've nothing else to, I don't have the crystal ball to pursue that. I can say that as a taxpayer who's followed these things closely. So I think what I'm trying to say here is trying to point out too that when you can't fund the school budget because of one town, students in both towns equally are impacted. And because we cannot fund, it doesn't look like, unless the school committee wants to go back tonight and add $620,000 to the budget before they finalize it and send that to the towns, we're not going to be able to fund a number of needs in the district. I would beg the committees, when you go out from this point forward to all the groups you meet with, to all the groups you discuss this with, that you highlight that this budget is starting with a $620,000 shortfall in it in terms of the budget needed to meet all the needs. So it's trying to meet fiscal realities of Harwich. And what's happening is, and it's going to happen, and as the enrollments, the trends that I'm hearing at these meetings are that this is only going to geometrically increase in terms of disproportion to Harwich over Chatham. Harwich is going to drive the school budget. And whatever that drive is going to impact every student in the district from Chatham. So people, I think, have to realize that and have to know about that and have to think about that in the discussions that they have, because we have a number of needs here that are not going to be met that I think are important needs. The administration, I think, thinks they're important needs. Hope the school committee thinks they're important needs. And the assessment process, as per the agreement, the regional agreement, which made sense 10 years ago, is not working out the way it would have been anticipated 10 years down the road at that point. So now I'm beating a dead horse, but those are my observations as one citizen taxpayer who lives in Harwich, who is a very, very, very strong advocate of quality education as a very important part of the services that are delivered by a community. As some of you expressed so well last evening, particularly Mr. Osceola, Mr. Russell, it's so important. My perspective added to theirs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, we're kind of at the top of the hour, but I'm happy to take any other questions or comments from other members of the public. Just hold your hand up. Let me just do one more quick scan here. Wave your hand. All right, I don't see anybody else. So I am going to bring our budget hearing to a close. We will have to adjourn via the school committee. And then we're going to take about maybe a 3-minute break, and then we'll transition into our regular meeting. So if I could have a motion to adjourn from the school committee.
So moved.
Thank you, Nancy. A second?
Second.
And Terry has seconded. So we're going to go around, and this is a motion to adjourn the public hearing, starting with Terry.
Aye.
Thank you. Joanne.
Aye.
Thank you. Nancy.
Aye.
Joe.
Cielo, aye.
Sharon.
Stout, aye.
Jackie. Meredith.
Aye.
And I'm an aye. So the public budget hearing is officially adjourned at 7:00 p.m. We'll take a 3-minute break, and those of you that would like to stay for our regular meeting, we will start in about 3 minutes. So thank you. We'll take a pause.
Hi, Rose. Can I ask you a question? You're over there now.
All right, I'm unmuted.
How are you this evening? It's nice to see you. I have your link. Do you want me to share it, or are you prepared to share it?
Oh, can you please share it? I am definitely not.
Okay. Not a problem.
Yeah.
Good. All right. I will get it all set up for us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll see you in 2 minutes.
Excellent.
All right, bye.
So Jen, I'm sitting here freezing. I'm trying to figure out, it's like, why is it so cold? 17-year-old girl has left a door completely open.
Like broken furnace?
Oh my, I'm like, you're like, why am I freezing to death?
That's funny.
Rose, I tell you, I miss live performances of anything so much. It's like my biggest thing. Yeah, and don't tell my mom I said this, but it's like I miss the whole music piece, maybe even more than I miss my mom. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I've actually gotten to see my mom a few times.
Oh,
Yep, it's a change. We're going to talk about that tonight a little bit.
yeah.
Maybe give you a little surprise show.
All right, school committee members, if you could come back into the Zoom room.
Zoom room.
Come on back into the Zoom room. All right, we're missing one of our school committee members. Let me give it maybe another second here. All right, it is 7:04. School committee members, we have everybody in the room, minus one. Don't want to call anybody out. Or maybe I
don't think we
have.
to call them out. Pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, we'll see what we can do to work. All right. So it is 7:05, and I am going to call the Thursday, February 11th school committee meeting to order at 7:05. This meeting is being held fully remotely in accordance with the Governor of Massachusetts, March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, GLC 30A, section 20. We'll call our meeting to order through a roll call attendance. And just if you could state your name and present, Terry, we'll start with you.
Terry Russell, present.
Thank you. Joe?
Joseph Osceola, present.
Thank you. Sharon?
Sharon Stout present.
Thank you. Joanne?
Joanne Sheehan present.
Thank you. Jackie?
Jackie Zebrat Long, present.
Thank you. Nancy?
Nancy Scott present.
Thank you. Meredith?
Meredith Henderson present.
Thank you. And Tina Games present. So we are in a full house tonight. Our first order of business is the approval of minutes from January 28th. Can I have a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Nancy. It has moved. And a second?
Second.
And I heard Meredith, so Meredith is seconding. Any discussion? Seeing Terry, you have a discussion? Go ahead.
Yes, it may not be appropriate regarding the minutes, but last evening's joint meeting with the select boards in reference to the elementary issues of children's per cost. I believe 2 weeks ago, our meeting, we had a motion that we approved unanimously, and it probably is in the minutes. And one of our members last evening, one of the select board members, questioned an additional motion of some sort, and I wonder if it would be appropriate for Lee to read the motion that we approved from our last meeting's minutes.
Leah, are you able to do that?
I'm able to, yes, I just have to find it. Pardon me. So I'm going to read it as it was captured in the minutes. The motion, after a bit of wordsmithing, the Monomoy Regional School District recognizes there's a financial inequity in funding the elementary schools. We recommend a joint meeting to resolve that inequity. That was seconded, and that motion was made by Nancy Scott. It was seconded by Jackie Zebrat Long. Joseph Osceola had asked if we could add review and after resolve in the motion. Therefore, Ms. Scott amended her motion to read, the Monomoy Regional School District recognizes there's a financial inequity in the funding of the elementary schools. We recommend a joint meeting to review and resolve that inequity. Ms. Zebrat Long then amended her second, and then we did a roll call vote, at which point it was unanimously approved.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other discussion? Joe?
So my point, unfortunately, I didn't have time to go back and review it today. On this motion, I believe my ask was to add resolve after the word review.
It had originally been as resolved first, and then review and added to the motion.
That is what I remember. We do have it on video, but that is what I recall, that you added review. Yeah. Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, we have a motion to approve. We have a second. So we're going to go around and approve the minutes as written. Terry, we'll start with you.
Aye.
Thank you, Joe.
Skeptical eye.
Thank you, Sharon.
Aye.
Thank you, Joanne.
Aye.
Jackie.
Aye.
Nancy.
Aye.
Meredith.
Aye.
And I'm an aye. All right, so that's unanimous and that will pass. Now we move into public comments. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes, additional time at the discretion of the chair. Do we have anybody from the public who would like to speak at this time? Charles, go ahead.
Thank you. Charles Gruska, 6 Teaberry Ave, Harwich, Mass. Some comments as a follow-up to last evening's joint meeting, comments to the school committee. There were some discussion brought out, or some information brought out last evening by certain members that over the years, there's been quite a bit of benefit financially to Chatham from regionalization that hasn't been shared by Harwich, and that Chatham has benefited greatly from regionalization, and now Chatham is being asked to consider additional funding for the district. I would ask the school committee if they would ask the administration to develop a report that compares the assessments of Harwich and Chatham for fiscal year 22 with their respective assessments in FY12, the last year pre-regionalization, so that the school committee, the town boards, and everyone in town could have a clear picture as to what is the difference between the town's financial status in having to support the schools with their tax dollars from FY12, last year pre-regionalization, with the budget assessments being asked for next year. I have some data that I put together in that regard a couple of years ago, and but I would like this administration to verify it. I did that on a previous business manager. I have some confidence in my figures because we spent so much time with it, but I don't want to talk too much about those figures unless the administration can verify them. What I am sure of is I have a chart of the assessments starting in FY13, the first year of regionalization, running up to the present. And what those charts show me is that, first of all, from my figures, both towns benefited, from my figures, to the tune of about $3 million less in assessment the first year of regionalization from what they were paying for their individual school systems the year prior. But starting in FY13 and going up to FY22 with the proposed assessments, Harwich is up about $8 million in assessment. Harwich stayed down below what they were paying for about 3 fiscal years. Around FY16 began to level off and has steadily been increasing. Chatham is about $500,000 above where they were in FY13 under regionalization. So about $8 million Harwich, about $500,000 Chatham, if we just look at FY13 versus FY22. I share that. I think that's important data, and I think it's really important data in all future meetings and discussions about these matters. And so I asked the school committee to ask for the figures of pre-regionalization so that can be brought into the picture as well. If my figures are correct, Chatham over the years has saved millions and millions and millions of dollars from funding their schools that they are able to put into other town departments' needs and services or keep the tax rates down. And Harwich has been greatly subsidizing that and seeing a steady and increasing pressure on their total town budget as a result of having to pick up the load for the district. I don't think that adjusting the funding, just the adjustment over each town funding its elementary schools is going to be enough to make a difference in the long run, but it's an excellent starting point to get us to the point where we can at least support the kind of budget the school committee is bringing forward this year. I think in the long run, there's going to have to be a bigger look at that, and numbers are going to have to be looked at to drive that. And finally, just one comment, I heard some comments last night about distances and traveling to other schools if students had to travel out of town. I worked in the first and largest regional school district in the state. Monomoy is the last and one of the smaller regional districts. But in my district, it would take you a full hour to drive from one end of the district to the other end of the district. And outside of my particular town and the other 3 other schools in my town in my last position, for me to drive to any other school in the district would take me longer than it would take to drive from Chatham Light to Harwich Elementary School or vice versa. So somebody made the comment last night that they've always looked at Monomoy and Harwich and Chatham really as one town, because they're really small enough to be one town. And so I think that was a point really well made. And another point, responding to some of the discussion last night, again, all for what it's worth and from one taxpayer's position who very much wants the very best that we can offer our students in the Monomoy Regional District. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles. Anybody else from the public like to make a comment at this time? And this is our only public comment period. All right, seeing none, we are going to move on in the agenda under reports and discussions. And unless there is opposition, I would like to move an item up in the order. I'd like to move performing arts modifications due to COVID up as first. So it's going to swap places with FY22 budget unless there's opposition. I don't see any. All right, good. So the first item, performing arts modifications due to COVID. Welcome, Ms. Police and Ms. Richards.
Thank you, Tina. Jen Police, principal at Monomoy Regional High School, and I'm here tonight with Rose Richard, our wonderful band and chorus director. And I think everybody in this room understands the importance of performing arts in our community. And in the recent events of COVID-19, we have certainly taken a hit. And we wanted to talk to you a little bit about what the modifications look like and the steps that we've taken as a school to be able to offer performing arts in a modified way. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of the timeline of events, and Rose is going to sort of fill in the blanks with some of our specifics. So first and foremost, when we opened in the fall, the state did not permit an option for band or theater arts, but they did allow for choral ensembles to run with modifications, but it had to be an outdoor activity. So at that time, we offered to run select choir, which actually is running in our daily schedule, but it is running as an outdoor class with safety protocols in place. Band and traditional chorus did not run as an option in our daily schedule. However, I think it was late October, early November, the state released their updated options for performing arts, and they allowed for a return of woodwind instruments with significant modifications. So at that time, Rose and I began working on a plan to allow for instrumental music to return to the high school, which Rose will outline those specific details for you. And then it actually was around that same time frame that we actually moved forward with a spring theater production of Alice in Wonderland, which is going to take place as a virtual production. So Rose is going to sort of fill in these specifics just so we can talk about what it's looked like so far and how far we've actually come.
Am I on? Yes, I'm not, right? Okay. We do have a performance for you this evening. I wish, because one of my favorite things is to bring the kids to you and in the room. So when Leah does play that, they were all excited. I was going to spring one of the Hamilton videos on you, and they were, you can't do that. And they came up with this piece that we actually learned 3 years ago and didn't get a chance to ever perform. And they said, oh, we're going to have to do that one. Very grateful. We've had select choir from the very beginning. There are 15 kids separated by cohorts. We have basically 3 days. One day it's half, the other day it's the other half. And the third day, we call it Everyone But Amy Day. There are 14 kids and one comes in remote. Sometimes she drives over. We learn everything by humming. In the room, we have a volunteer parent, a graduate of Monomoy, who went off to be a music teacher and went to my alma mater and is gainfully employed up in Gloucester. Her mom made us singer masks, which are great. Band started at the tail end of October, and I remember reading it online from friends. And at 8 o'clock the next morning, Jen messaged me and said, let's meet today about starting band. And I think we were up and running within 3 weeks. We have the 3 different cohorts, and amazingly enough, instrumentation is actually pretty good. They come in at 9:30 in the morning and we run band. Amanda and I run band from 9:30 to 10:15. We have an absolute blast. I had one morning that I burst into tears in the middle of playing. Amanda and I are both playing with them, and I just burst into tears because it was so beautiful. We're hoping when we come back from break to do a little bit of combining of the cohorts because we can split them up that much in the auditorium. There are 2 sections of music theory running this semester. I had one last, and my history of rock class is also running both semesters. All of the kids in history of rock last semester, they got all the mural boards, and while we were fully remote, they did the.
You're muted. You're muted, Rose.
Right in the left corner, Rose. Just all the way down the left corner. Or maybe it's, yeah, I guess it's.
Unmute. I hit something.
You're good.
Now am I up?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Where did I lose you? History of rock murals. That's all happening. Alice in Wonderland. Rachel Barnes is directing. We have a student who is composing some of the pieces in it in the play. It's a play with some music in it and then options for more music. Phoebe Gill, who is a junior, has composed 5 pieces for it. She was in music theory last semester and had a tremendous knack for composing. That will be March 18, 19, and 20. And after the February vacation, we'll be doing a sign up where people will email in for a virtual ticket. Super excited about that. And then Amanda Sherman, the high school arts department head, and I talked yesterday about doing our senior arts night. And by then the weather will be fine for an outdoor concert that we can socially distant and space out. But I told the seniors yesterday, the 6 girls, and they were beside themselves excited. They were like, that's the best news we've had all year long. So that's going extremely well. Everything is good. It's frustrating, but we're making it happen. And then apparently, and I had said something to Jen earlier, I had seen online a good friend who's a huge heavy hitter in the state of Massachusetts, the choral director up at Brockton High School. Apparently Jeff Riley contacted people, and DESE seems to be on our side. Massachusetts, I found this out 20 minutes ago. Massachusetts is the only state in our country who is not allowing singing inside with masks.
That is true.
We are the only state. I have a whole list of all the states and all the restrictions. And my friend in Brockton and I were horrified and commiserating together before I clicked in here. But yeah, we're making it happen. And I'm grateful, as are my students.
Thank you. Thank you, Rose and Jen. And there is no video, or you were teasing us, or you're.
Oh no,
Leah's gonna play it.
Oh,
Yeah.
Leah. Okay.
I'm just waiting for the high sign.
Okay.
go
Does
for it.
anybody? All right. So let's go for the video.
Any questions before we move on? We should probably open up to any questions.
Yep. Anybody with a question before we see our video? Nancy, go ahead.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment and say thank you. I've been following your Twitter updates and enjoying them immensely. So
Awesome.
thank you very much for posting those.
Thank
Those are
you.
awesome.
Great. Sharon, go ahead.
I have never been anywhere that Rose Richards has been performing with her group that I haven't been like just
Amazed.
amazed. It's always the highlight of whatever's going on.
Sure is.
You've
So,
always been a good supporter too. Thank you.
yes, I'm very excited. I'm so glad it's going on. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Meredith, go ahead.
So I just want to say thank you too. I get to have a little bit of an inside scoop because
Yes.
my daughter's part of your team,
Yes.
which is really awesome. And I've seen as as you've adjusted the protocols for COVID, they get to do a little bit different things. So I'm really.
Oh my God. I totally forgot. We had 5 kids participate in the Senior Southeast District virtual music festival, and all 5 had a blast. I was bopping in and out of virtual rehearsal rooms on the Saturday, the second day, and we are eagerly awaiting the video, which the chorus video it has something like 230 kids singing. Bless the video editor who's doing that one.
And I got to listen to all of those rehearsal times that Saturday. But I just want to thank you. And I was really excited. I had talked to Madam Chair about making sure that, things were able to happen for our performing arts students because, we're really, Jen and Dr. Carpenter and everyone is making such an effort to make things happen for our athletes, but for our performing arts students, that is their team. So
Yep.
I'm so happy to hear that this is happening for them and they're excited. And even though Alice in Wonderland is going to be virtual, they still get to be part of that team. So it's just awesome. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
You are welcome. Thank you for your support.
Thank you. Terry, go ahead. And you'll have to come off mute, Terry. And I now know, I think your button is up at the top corner.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
Perfect. Yep.
Almost forgot what I was going to say. Jan and Rosemary, I'm just echoing the last 2 folks here, happened to be unretired. So I was watching ironically, the Senate trial all day this afternoon. And the House of the Representatives manager quoted Thomas Paine. And it captures what you're going through, both of you as principal, but also our drama and music director. It went something like this: the greater the hardship, the greater the challenge, the greater joy when you accomplish it.
Oh yeah.
No matter in our life, that's so true in all the things we move into. So good for you. Whoever would invited all of ourselves to this unthinkable task. And in the end, if we give it our best, there is a tremendous amount of joy that you never would have experienced. So keep it up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'll just say real quickly before we go into the video, I'm a theater person, as I think a lot of people know. I did not have kids that followed my dreams or my passion, so I never had an opportunity at Monomoy. But anyway, I did at least no other kids that were involved. And Rose, you've just done a phenomenal job. And when Deb Donovan was there, I mean, some of those productions were just amazing.
Thank you.
So, yeah. And so we thank you. And when Meredith reached out to me, I agreed, because I have had a love for theater and the performing arts. So I appreciate all that you've done to keep it alive.
Thank you for your support.
Absolutely. So now we go to the video.
I don't often share out, so bear with me as I pull it up. If you can't hear it, yell at me.
Okay.
Mac, do you want me to pack your robe for going? The pool is like not, you can't walk in our building to the pool. We have to jump in the car and drive to another building.
Is somebody, I think somebody
sweats
might
on over your suit to go? Do you want your robe?
I can't access them.
Sweats.
Fabulous. Fabulous, fabulous. I was looking for my little, here we go, my hand clap. Fabulous. That was wonderful. Any comments, questions? I mean, that was virtual. Isn't that amazing? All right. Thank you very much, Rose and Jen. Thank you for coming tonight and for giving us that treat. Thank you. All righty, moving to the next item, we're going to jump back up to the FY22 budget, which we heard a lot about just a few minutes ago, but let's hear some more. Michael.
Well, so I'm happy to open to any questions from school committee now on the budget we presented, since you didn't have the opportunity to public hearing. As you saw with the new health insurance figures we received just over a week ago, we were able to bring the budget down to just under 1%. And our next step really is to bring this back on March 11th to get your final approval before it goes to the town meetings.
Michael, thanks for clarifying that. So it can come back again because it has potential votes. So are you saying that we can wait till next meeting?
Yeah, so we have a budget, we have a FY22 final budget vote is scheduled for March 11th.
Okay, all right, thank you. So that's actually 2 more meetings. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, next one and then the next one. Okay. Any questions about the budget that was presented during the hearing, school committee members? Comments, questions?
I have one question.
Go ahead.
Tina, to Michael. I'm sure the answer is obvious, but not to me. Michael, as we accrue interest over the previous years, I noticed one of the unfunded items, and it would be a one-shot deal, either lease or purchase, was a high school van to do certain things. Would it be good practice to identify the amount and match that up with the interest and attempt to pay for it out of the interest?
So we already budget interest as part of the general fund and other state aid. So we already have interest budgeted as revenue we're relying on for the general budget.
Yep.
So, but like I said in the presentation, we're always looking for means, and we have received some new grants from the state to help with the coronavirus relief response. And so hopefully somewhere along, that will help us afford some of those items in that priority list.
Thanks, Mike. I'm entitled to one silly question each meeting.
No, there's no such thing.
Thank you. Sharon, go ahead.
So the things in the box that you presented on this one of what was eliminated, the 5th grade teacher, I think there were 2 others, or 3 others, I'd have to look back. Those are the only things that are eliminated from the budget for positions, because at first it said something like whatever wasn't funded for this year won't be funded for next year. So I just wanted to make sure that I was very clear in what those things were. I know we went over this before, but I don't know if it changed.
Yeah, it sounds like you understand it exactly right. So the only slight, I mean, I'm loath to even bring it up, but the only slight wrinkle is that what we're comparing with is complicated. So we're kind of comparing with what was the budget for FY21 before coronavirus hit. So compared to that, those are the reductions we've made and the positions we've added.
Okay, so there are only those couple that are listed right there. That's it.
Yeah, so it's like, what, 4.6 and are just 4.5 are added. And then there's the other ones that we haven't filled this year. Do you want me to get the slide up?
Well, I
actually know where it is now.
So at the middle school, for instance, all of I see a 5th grade teacher eliminated for next year, but there were no, what do they call them? Specialists. So it was only that one teacher, and there were not any like music, art, library, or any of those kind of things that were not this year.
Nope. Yep, exactly. So we're not cutting any of those.
And I know I don't really like to move money from one cost center to another cost center, but when we found out that our health was less, our health insurance was less, because the selectmen have been asking us to keep our budget under 2%. And right now, what is the bottom line of what the selectmen would consider?
Well, the problem is our budget is under 1%. It's 0.99%. The problem is the impact on Harwich is much higher than that. You know, so if they're asking us to keep under 2% right now, it's at 3.16%.
Yes. Okay. All right, because normally when I think of another 1%, I think, well, some of those things that Charles brought up that were important. I do see at the middle school, it looks like there's one counselor missing from the budget. It looked like there were 2 there, and now there's 1 there. There was, I forget what their names are. One came from the high school down to the middle school, I believe, Mrs. Whitcomb. She retired. Maybe she's not being replaced. I don't really know. I'm just looking at numbers, so it doesn't have people's names on them. But I understand what you're saying about the impact. It's very disturbing when.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, I think.
And that.
So, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm just checking, but I think what it is at the middle school is that we created a new line for what, so there's still the same number of counsellors, they're just in different lines.
Okay.
That's all. I'm so sorry to interrupt. Yeah. I was like racking my brain to try and remember why, because I knew we hadn't cut any positions.
Okay, well that's good, because I mean, clearly with COVID, I wouldn't expect any of the kids to be having a normal time recently. But I do, this is a very, I'm so glad you said that, Michael, because it just highlights that no matter what we do to cut our budget or try to put in some things that are really, I don't know, desired or needed things, that the impact to Harwich is much bigger than what they're asking every other town department to do. So I appreciate what you're saying. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I know, I agree. You know, a budget increase less than 1% is normally, you know, more than enough to keep everybody happy.
Yes.
So it is striking the situation we're in.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Nancy.
Michael, could you, or Michael and Scott, if you guys could just kind of give a brief reminder as to how the wish list comes about, because I know that it's a group effort of all the administrators, and it's not you two or us picking the different priorities and picking the order, that it's a group effort with the administrators.
So we meet with all, each principal individually. So it tends to be Michael and I, Mark Smith and Melissa meet individually with each principal. We discuss, with them, what their needs are in the building. We have the same conversation with Jim Birchfield when it comes to technology, with our athletic director. So we meet with each individual, and also look at what might be needed at central office or under the umbrella of student services, and come up with a list of things that that people think they need. We also push hard to look at where might there be efficiencies that each see in their realm, and that's where, when we look at the list of staffing, when there are reductions that you're seeing, that's those are things that that in some cases, a principal saying, hey, here's where I see some sort of efficiency, here's where my needs are. And so we come up with that list of things that we'd like to fill. We start looking at, okay, what can we manage within, this amount of budget, and at the end of the day, what are the ones that we can't get, and we try to take that wish list and prioritize it. What are the things that are most critical that we really want to make sure that that happen? What are the things that we are able to operationalize in this budget, and then what are some things that become really the starting point when we're developing next year's budget? So there are things that that we know, many of them that Charles mentioned, and we also look at the budget itself is still somewhat in flux. There are things that will shift, and we can look at that unfunded list and say, if our position improves, hopefully we can go and pick off some of those things from that list within the budget that we're moving forward, and that sometimes happens each year as well.
Thank you. I have just a quick question. So I've been following the agenda packet as I keep looking up at my other screens. The PDF in the agenda packet that we were sent, the changes to staffing, is the headings are wrong?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
I just want to make sure that isn't, I'm looking at the website.
Yeah.
And that one's accurate. I just want to make sure the one that was in our agenda packet didn't get posted anywhere other than just for our agenda.
Yeah, and that's why I included the extra slide just to highlight, because those are jumbled up.
Okay, just thank you. I just wanted to make sure.
Thank you. Anybody else? I just had a couple of quick questions. And you might have noted this. I was trying to manage the public hearing, so I might have missed this. But with the additional nurse, with some of what I hope, I guess the federal down to the state funding tied to COVID, are things like that, like nurses that clearly we're having to bring on because of COVID. Is there a funding source perhaps that might surprise us at some point? Okay.
Yes. So that's exactly the sort of thing we're trying to work through right now, because we've received additional funding from the state, and we're still just the federal government and from the state, and trying to see how we can make that work with our budget to give us the things we need that fall within the definitions of the grants.
Okay.
And so, yes, so that's another thing when we come back to that list. So if we're able to use some of the funding, the only thing you have to just be careful around is obviously that grant funding is a one-off. So we don't want to use it to fund too many positions, because eventually we won't have those grants and we won't be able to keep paying for positions, and that will be a hit to the budget. So it's just trying to get, the right balance between what we can fund through these that meet the criteria of the grant, but also give us what we need in the district, and relieve pressure on the budget. So if you're trying to do all those things, hopefully, and then that we keep coming back to our list of unfunded priorities.
Okay, thank you. The other question, I noticed that the athletic trainer, I guess this is the high school, so she's gone up to full time. What is full time? What how many hours is that? I'm just curious.
So you could think of it as it's not a full time in the athletic trainer role. She is doing a combination of picking up some clerical activities during the day. The reality of our athletic trainer is we have been concerned that she has been a teaching assistant full time. So she works from the beginning of the school day to the end, to the end of the school day, and then goes on to be our athletic trainer, and is there long hours, and she's oftentimes the last one to leave after every athlete leaves, after every practice or game, and just trying to look at that job and how much we're paying that individual relative to other athletic trainers out there, trying to make sure that we round out a position that is a full-time position, that we're paying an athletic trainer fair. And
right.
So there's some of that athletic trainer adjustment is us trying to move things around under the umbrella of athletics to make sure that we get all of those clerical things in terms of concussion information and making sure all athletes have their updated physicals in and everything, that all of that's happening in addition to making sure that the athletic trainer has time. And a lot of times there are students that are going to that trainer during the lunch block for supports, to make sure that they're able to actually function better as a trainer by being available during the school day instead of only available after the school day.
Right. Okay. And that's good to hear, because I'm very familiar with her work, having had a daughter who is an athlete. So I know that it does quite a lot during the day with injuries and things like that. I was also wondering, with the unified sports coach, I would imagine the athletic trainer has to be a part of that too, right? Doesn't she have to be available? So
Right.
that's kind of an additional thing. Okay. All right, that's fine. I was just curious because I just saw full-time and I just was wondering what that meant compared to what she had been doing, what we had her for before.
Well, I would argue that she's been far more than full-time, and we just want to make sure that that we're appropriately having an athletic trainer that we can keep, because we have a manageable job. And I think what she has had, and Taylor is exceptional. And you want to keep good people around and make sure that that you keep them around by making sure their job and compensation is appropriate.
Oh, absolutely. And I will say again, I am aware she does quite a lot during the day, serving as what I would call a PT, so there's a lot that I'm aware that she does. So I was just curious what that meant. Any other questions, comments about the budget? Joanne?
Quick question about the history texts. I noticed they were middle school and high school. Are those just replacement texts, not program?
Yes, I believe that's right. Oh, Mark's here. Oh,
Do you want me to take that one?
yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yes. So it would be re-examining the text. So for U.S. History 1 and 2, by example, our texts are over 20-something years old at this point. So it would be going through a full curriculum review process to determine determine a new resource, as opposed to just trying to find copies of the existing one we have. And the same for the 6th and 7th grade. The standard shifted maybe 3 years ago for history, and there was a big impact on 6th and 7th grade, where one grade used to be geography, and one grade used to be ancient civilizations. They've reorganized it to be anchored around regions of the world that look at civilizations past and present. So even the texts that we have now don't align at all to that instructional new framework. So it would be looking for, again, going through a proper review process to bring forward a new curriculum resource or new text. I mean, it might not ultimately be a text. I don't want to pigeonhole us to that, but but some main resource that the teachers can use to develop and design their instruction and lessons.
Okay, the old history teacher says, good. There really is a place for more current tests and more, I call it umbrella history, where everything feeds into it, all the threads. So that's great.
And just as a connected aside, Michael and I have had conversations too about developing a textbook replacement cycle plan and building that into our and our budgeting long range process. Nothing on the horizon. I know Mr. Russell asked me after a meeting, sort of, do we have something as big as the ELA curriculum that we see on the horizon? No, it's smaller, grade level text purchases, which are much more manageable than the big ticket of the ELA curriculum.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Any other questions or comments, budget related? Okay, seeing none. So no vote tonight. This will come back next time, right? Or on the 11th. Okay, for the vote. All right, thank you. Moving on to the next item, the community forum, elementary school disparities. So everybody, we were looking at dates and we did settle on March 4th. And the discussion of the last meeting is that we would start that with an educational component, talking about classrooms and how classrooms are put together, because there's a huge misunderstanding out there that you can just create a classroom. Somebody's interested, you know. So we're going to do a little bit about the creation of classrooms. And I know we had also talked about at this forum, and I wanted to get clarification on the pros and cons of a small school. Is that something that we were going to incorporate also, or did you want to keep that separate? Any feedback on that? Nothing? So is that something we can, oh, Joanne, go ahead.
Well, I have been digging for information and I'm looking at abstracts and there's just not much other than anecdotal information that will speak to small schools, small classrooms. I have my feelings about it, but it's anecdotal. I can tell you what happens in a classroom when there's too few kids, or your genders are all skewed or are skewed in one direction. And to try and find an educational article is so. Charles, hey Charles, I was thinking about you today as I was digging. You haven't ever, in your professional manuals, or
actually, are you getting ready to ask Charles a question? Because he's a member. Okay, I just want to make sure.
No, I'm just giving him a job.
Oh, okay, all right.
Everybody gets a job if you're around me. If you ever come across anything that speaks to small schools, could you just send it my way? Thank you. That was it. That was all I was going to do.
Thank you, Joanne. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I've gone down the same path that Ms. Sheehan did, although I didn't know we were doing that. I mean, it's pretty simple, I guess, really. The decades and decades of budget crises, budget cuts, funding issues, and conflicts means that a surfeit of small class sizes doesn't exist in America. You can't do a study. There just aren't enough small classes to study in any meaningful way. It's just like studying clog dancing in America or something. There just aren't enough people doing it to make a meaningful study. Given that, is our intent on March 4th about small class sizes? Is it our intent to ask the public for feedback or preference? And are we kind of polling folks? Is that our intent? It wasn't clear to me. So
I think it's the community forum is really inviting people to show up and have a conversation or ask questions and make their feelings known about what's happening, about the elementary school disparity. So it could stretch to what's happening at Chatham, and it could also include the elementary school disparities as what came out at our joint meeting. I guess it just depends on how we want to define that, but it's also an open forum, I think, under that elementary school umbrella, and however people feel like they need to speak up around it. Terry, go ahead.
I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago as far as programmatically responding to the forum. And this would only be my suggestion that our team leaders, that's Scott and the two elementary principals, Mark, Michael, Melissa, get together and address what key issues have already been reviewed a couple of years ago regarding Chatham's lack of children, the numbers and why, and the summary of how that might play out in a variety of ways through their thought press. They're living this far more than any of us are. And when the presentation occurs, it could be similar to our budget presentation, Tina. You welcome people and highlight what our goal is, and then begin it by allowing our team to then present 10 minutes, 12 minutes of an overview of what is, what was, what could be potentially some developmental programs for the elementary schools, including the role Howard Elementary would have to play in this. And then part 3 would be to open it up with the number of parent folks virtually pitching in with, have you ever thought of this, or whatever. And that to me is, and if we need to do that a couple of times in the next few months, so be it. That would probably generate some ideas and also reinforce in our own minds. And I agree with Joanne that you can search and search and search, and yet there may only be 3 or 4 or 5 logical ways to address this issue. But that would be my thought as to how the meeting could go.
Thank you, Terry. It's a good thought. Nancy, go ahead.
I agree with Terry that it's going to be a several meeting thing. We're going to have a few of these, but I think that just from my perspective, what I would like to see, and Joanne, you kind of alluded to this at the last meeting, a very short presentation, and make it more about hearing from the public and letting them ask questions and express their concerns, and make it more about a listening session from them instead of a presentation from us. So if we're planning, I believe the timeline was an hour and a half, if I remember correctly. So maybe plan for absolutely no more than a half hour presentation aspect, but maybe even shorter, just because I think that the parents want to be heard. The community members want to be heard as to what their ideas are, what their fears are, what their concerns are, and what they'd like to see going forward. So that would be my preference, but I'm open to anything.
Thank you. Terry?
Thought strikes me also, I fully agree with Nancy and Joanne, whether it's 12 minutes or 25, but I've been very impressed, and we're lucky, and it alludes back to Michael's skill regarding these budgetary slide presentations. I would suggest, coming from the weakest skilled person in that area, I find it it's a very quick study. Not so much just the budget, put that aside for now, but if our team could put up a 5-minute slide presentation regarding what has been, what is, how the configurations look like with some slides, I think moms and dads over virtual would be far quicker to say, aha, I get that. Now I understand it. So that's just a suggestion as far as what in the old days we'd call AB. So.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? So I think these are all good ideas, and hopefully our admin team and Joanne and I will connect with Scott in our leadership meetings. But I definitely do believe we all agreed on addressing the classroom, because that's something we hear over and over again. People thinking we can just form classrooms, if 1 or 2 people are interested, and why didn't they get in, and that sort of thing. So I do think that absolutely has to be addressed in some way, and however else we want to do it is fine. So just wanted to get some clarity. And I also agree, I would probably say 15-minute presentation or 20-minute, and leaving as much time as possible for dialogue and Q&A from the public. Because I agree, this is a time, we did make that commitment to Chatham last night at the joint meeting, and I want to follow through with it, and we do need to hear from the community. All right, any other final comments? So that will be March 4th, 6:30 to 8. So I'm just making that statement publicly here tonight. And we will be posting out, I guess Leah and I will be posting out the next day or so, March 4th from 6:30 to 8. It will be virtual. So the school committee will be present with the admin team, and we'll be very happy to have as many people from the public as possible at that first forum, March 4th. Okay, no final comments. We will move on to the next item, which is the regional agreement joint meeting from last night. And I put this on the agenda just for some reflections, because I know we really didn't have a chance to really debrief after last night. So I wanted to just kind of put this on the agenda and open it up for anyone who wanted to debrief, share your observations. Did it, anything that might have come to you from last night? Let's open the floor.
Well, I took my meds. I feel so much better. I could have used our drama and music director's virtual harmonizing group for background music.
Thank you, Terry. Any other comments, questions, anything? Sharon, go ahead.
I feel like it was the only time that the full school committee and both select boards were there. And I think there was quite a bit of people really stating how they perceive things from their point of view. Some people chose not to say anything, but it was clear that we've got a ways to go. I think everyone wants the best for the kids, but in the two different towns, just as the budget showed clearly tonight, that we're looking at different things. So I think it was great that we came together and opened that up, and yet to be seeing how quickly or easily this works out. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Anyone else? Joe.
Well, some things got done. Nothing terribly unexpected. The Harwich Board of Selectmen said that regarding the elementary schools in particular and the regional agreement overall, money was an issue, that Harwich was being shortchanged, and a readjustment is necessary to bring some money from Chatham into Harwich. And the Harwich Board of Selectmen members had an opportunity to present that and make that clear. Some of us said it as well. Chatham people, the Chatham Select Board, on the other hand, listened, didn't say too much about what would come next. One select board member said, Chatham is the problem and Chatham has to do something. No one else seconded that sentiment, and there's no clear commitment, as I heard it, for what the Chatham Select Board is going to do. And okay, fine. At least we have the ball rolling a little bit. From my own perspective, I thought that the Board of Selectmen in Harwich had their main purpose as making the need for change in funding and to make that case strongly. And I think they have to do more next time, for me at least. I want to hear from the Harwich Board of Selectmen a strong, vocal, full-throated commitment to the schools and the school district. Full stop. We can do two things at one time. They can do two things at one time. We can move towards adjusting the financial reality that we have to something more favorable and more equitable, and at the same time have a non-negotiable full tilt commitment to the need for quality education in our district. I didn't hear it. What I did hear was that some people, some part of the community of Harwich, a large part perhaps, are coming to really a kind of breaking point that hypothetically in the future, Harwich, members of the Harwich community might vote against a school committee budget. And then I waited for the next paragraph. I wanted that Board of Selectmen member who raised this scenario to go on and say what he was going to do in response to such a situation. I wanted to hear him say, however that sentiment might be, I'm going to push back and I'm going to say, we're working on the financial part, but in the meantime, we don't let the school system falter. We don't let it take a step back. We will support the school system strongly and thoroughly. I waited for those words from members of the Board of Selectmen in Harwich, and I did not hear them. I really need to. I think those are deserved. I need a lot more than just generic, we've got to support the kids kind of talk. I'm talking full-on commitment to the Monomoy Regional School District. It's about time.
Thank you, Joe. Terry.
Not that we prolong, because there'll be other developments, and I too am glad that both boards from the town, Select as well as Howard and Chatham, got together for the first time and spent a couple of hours around this issue. Kind of reflecting Joe's comment about the Howard Select Board as they begin to ponder whatever they may be able to do. As I listened, someone from Howard, I too was hoping that I heard the Chatham Board reflect more on what they think they can do. And as I ended the meeting and suggested we don't create more motions, but maybe it's time for the Chatham Board to return to their meeting and begin to chew over what they think they can do with their voters, constituents. I think we now are on a knowledge level, fully understand, we, the three groups, what is at stake. So I think from where I'm coming from this township, I'm looking for the Chatham folks with some statements because I still am a little, I've heard, yes, parity, it is a problem, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe that's to come. The other point I raised, and this is not a new issue, and I guess it becomes an old one if you stay around here as a member of the committee or living here in town in Howard, it becomes an old issue. I failed to remember it last evening, but as I sat watching some sports later on in the night, the issue of parity, and I think, Joe, you mentioned there is no word parity in the regional agreement, which is fine and understandable. However, when the two towns voted to join, and Nance, you may have been party to this, 10 years ago or 9, whatever it was, with our superintendent covering that year, and with our attorneys, there was a whole issue of parity, and it took us a whole year, the school committee members, to meet with the Unit A and B regarding parity of the two contracts. Chatham contracts, Howard contracts. And for the full year, with a lot of slow decision-making and a lot of cherry picking from the best in each contract, we, the new regional committee, had to come up with an agreement. And what it was, one of the prime issues, similar to the kids and money, was that the Chatham staff were paid several steps higher, $2,000 or $3,000 per person. I could be off a little bit at the time in 2010 or 2011 than the Howard team. And we, the school committee, had to come up with a way to launch some fairness. I think the Unit A agreed to a 2-year a rollover with our management attorneys and the school committee members. And many things within those 2 separate contracts had to be talked over to come to a parity point. So the idea of this is a whole new thing to us, it really isn't. And all segments of work organizations, a lot had to go into that before we even officially agreed to come up with a whole new 3rd contract, which would be the Monomoy regional one for Unit A and Unit B and whatnot. A long, long, hard task was done. And then so it just reflected that, gee, very similar to what we're facing now in the way of parity within the kids and how we spend our money in the 2 elementary schools. So hopefully this is probably one of our bigger regional committee member challenges, but we'll get through it, I think.
Terry. Nancy, go ahead.
I agree with what Joe and Terry both said. I think, and I'll back up first and say, I think last night was very productive. I think it was great to have, I think we were only missing 1 board member out of the 18 of us, which plus all of the additional administrative roles for all 3 of our boards. But I think that everybody was able to hear the concerns from both sides. I very much agree with what Joe and Terry both said, in that I think I should say it felt like Chatham has their concerns and they express those. Harwich kind of expressed their concerns. They didn't really say anything other than, and maybe I'm zoning out a little bit, but it seemed like they were focused on and saying that, oh, our only concern is the money aspect.
Yeah.
And I feel like it needs to be more than that. And I agree with what Joe said, that yes, we can work on this, and we do see that there's an inequity, and we do see that Harwich is paying a lot more every year to help subsidize Chatham Elementary. And yet it would be nice to have that assurance that says, okay, yes, we're going to figure out and we're going to make that financial arrangement to make it better. And we do want to have that continued support. It really didn't feel like they were very supportive of the schools and were wanting the schools to continue to perform. And then I also understand where Chatham's coming from and wanting to say that, hey, we can talk about this assessment change, but I don't want it to be a long-term assessment change. And I don't, as I said last night, I don't picture it being long-term. I picture it being a one-year thing, and we're starting to look at the elementary schools going forward. So I can see where both sides are coming from, and it would be nice if it could be less focused from each side and looking more at the broader picture and say, okay, what can we do and where can we go going forward? I think we're going to need to have more of these conversations to kind of keep everybody on task and focused at where our challenges are, financial and population, and programmatically at the elementary schools. So I think it was a good start, and I think it's going to give them a lot of food for thought, and it's going to give them a lot of talking points. And I think we should continue and maybe try to plan another one within the next couple of months or so to keep it going.
Thank you. Anybody else? Scott, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to clarify, what might be a misconception. I think I heard it multiple times last night too. The proposal, as I was, sort of writing about it in the piece that, sort of fueled all of this, is that if you're having each town pay for its own elementary school, or however we want to look at the financial transaction, that it is a long-term thing. It's not a one-year thing, and it has to be a long-term thing, because even if we do some sort of reorganization of elementary schools, and there's an upper or a lower, or there's a redistricting that happens where at the end of the day there are more Harwich kids at Chatham Elementary School than currently. It happens at the expense of, I would argue, the Harwich taxpayers, in that you're pulling kids out of one building and causing its per pupil cost to go up to depress the per pupil costs in the other building. They're fundamentally, at the end of the day, at the elementary level, we have a fiscal issue that needs sort of a long-term thing, not a one-year fix. And I think that however the communities decide to address the best educational program and what sort of reorganization that might be, is a separate thing that we want to long-term do that, but we also need to address the long-term fiscal piece of this.
Thank you. Anybody? Yeah, I was going to make a couple of comments, Scott, and thank you for saying that, because one of the things I heard, or at least on the Harwich side, the whole concept of the upper and lower. I mean, it sounds like a great possibility. Chatham seemed to be very in favor. Not that we've even gotten to that point, but that is something I kept hearing Chatham bring up a lot. And Harwich, basically what I heard is it's not going to help us financially. So I thought Joe made a really great statement, and I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember exactly, but educating other people's children. And I know that families are a minority in both towns. And I think one of my thoughts or concerns, I should say, really going to the Harwich taxpayers this go round is, you know, I think we're a minority, you know, going in there. And I loved how Joe talked about, I can't remember your words, Joe, the sacred responsibility, something along those lines. And I think I just have to hope people are going to see it that way. I'm a little concerned personally, based on some emails I've gotten today. I'm just not sure people are thinking that way right now. I think they're really looking, or at least in the Harwich side, at least looking at the fiscal piece of this. So Scott had noted, kind of jokingly, I think, although I kind of feel it was true, that we were a little bit of a marriage counselor last night. And, you know, when we had the two spouses at the table that clearly had different directions that they might want to go. And so I kept wondering, you know, this might be a first joint meeting. There might be another one coming up, and hopefully after everybody's gone off and digested, and maybe we can have some other conversations to come back again, because it was clear to me on both sides, Harwich and Chatham. Harwich had their thought about it and Chatham had their thought about it. But I thought it was a good dialogue. I was quite surprised and happy that it didn't get contentious. I was a little concerned about that, but it didn't get that way. It was very respectful. And I very much appreciated the respect that everybody showed each other last night and stated what they needed to state. Terry, go ahead.
You know, as jumping off a point that Scott just made, the problems we're facing is somewhat unique to the extent, as I describe it, somewhat simply. The problem is lack of children in the elementary level in the Chatham Elementary School. The analysis of the problem is there doesn't seem to be the ability for the Chatham citizens to generate enough children within their own township to fill those needed seats. The solution doesn't exist with choice from Brewster, Dennis, Yarmouth to fill those seats. So the problem we're facing and have seen grow, or I should say shrink, is the lack of children that went from 3 sections down to almost 1 starting out, but in the Chatham Elementary. The dilemma is the solution, to a great degree, rests with the Harwich side of things. In other words, we might take a look at 2 levels, but the children to fill those seats are the Harwich kids. So that's a uniqueness, because usually separate standing alone towns, Harwich, for example, if they were a separate town, you'd say we have a Harwich problem. The solution rests in the Harwich town. And you could bring it to your town meeting and say, we're short 2 teachers, give us the money or don't give us the money. Whereas there is no way Chatham is going to, in the next 5 years, get 100 children from outside the district to move in and fill those seats with either choice or from their own new families who move. That's just my probably logical guess. So as we move towards this, whatever solution rests with filling those to, let's say, 2 sections, 2K, 2-1, 2 sections over there, it would probably have to come from the 500, give or take, children over at the Harwich Elementary, which makes it a very challenging way to approach the solution, because Harwich mothers and dads, whether it's redistricting, as Scott said, they would have to be met and somewhat agree that yes, that's fine. And of course, that doesn't solve the whole problem, because the empty seats over in Harwich reflects the cost of increase to run that school. So that and whether or not again, coming from where I am coming from, I know that a couple of the Chatham Select Board members, they recognize, hey, we have a problem here. We don't have enough kids. But they also must recognize that the solution is probably going to come from the town of Howard. So somewhere or another, either some funding helps us out and we help them out by creating an elementary model that if Chatham didn't exist, as I said it last night, I'm sure the Howard Elementary principal, Mary, and her colleagues would say, you need a change. You're not improving your school enough. They probably would say, pretty good to us. So they're going to have to be convinced to say, we, the two schools, have a problem. We need your children, some segment of them, to look towards maybe moving in the redistricting or moving it first grade second. And therein, that's the odd issue about this problem. It's one town having the dilemma, the other town as a potential solver of it.
Thank you, Terry. Any other comments? Jackie, it looks like you have a thought forming. Scott, go ahead.
I guess I would like to maybe make a suggestion on something that we could put on a former school committee agenda. And in part, I do think that Charles, the part of his comment that he made at the start of the meeting, when he was looking back at the math on, what did it look like in FY12 versus FY22. Coincidentally, Charles, Michael and I today were going back to a presentation that I made to our school committee, and it's the last time that I actually kind of went over what those numbers were. Was October 23rd, 2013. And I was reflecting back on the first couple years of regionalization and how, what the towns were seeing in terms of savings or potentially more costs. And there were some interesting things that were going on the eve of regionalization back then. But now we're 10 years, we're 10 years out, and we've tracked it. We've tracked it, and we've, came up with a little spreadsheet that shows what the cumulative, benefit or the cumulative, costs have been, and I think it would be something that would be a useful thing, because I do think going before both boards, that's an important, I think that's an important, eye opener that I think really gets at the urgency that this is something that we can't keep batting around and kick the can down the road another fiscal year and another fiscal year after that. But I do think that the numbers as they have been playing out are not what the framers, if I kind of look at constitutional law wise, I think the framers of the regional agreement, I don't think intended for it to play out the way it has been. And and you have these times where you get to sit back and say, okay, it's time to relook at the regional agreement, and is this what we intended to have it do or not? And I think that that there are other school districts that regionalize differently. So in the case of our neighbor to the north, they regionalized middle school and high school, and then have a loose confederation, with a superintendency union at the elementary level, so that each town is paying for its own elementary school. And in that superintendent union, they still have, they're still trying to have the same curriculum and everything happening at the elementary level, but you're not having Brewster subsidize a very, very, very small elementary school in Wellfleet. And that's kind of what, our regional agreement didn't come together that way, and has created something that I don't think the framers of the agreement were intending it to happen. It just has.
Thank you, Scott. Anything else? Nancy.
So Scott, you mentioned it, and there has been a few conversations about what it would take to pull the elementary schools out of the regional agreement. So that is on people's radar to say, well, and while it doesn't change the financial aspect of it for Chatham, if Chatham ends up paying for their full elementary school through this assessment or through the assessment, they still would be doing that if they pulled it out. So apparently that's not really, I would say, as much of a concern, but there is a conversation happening of, you know, what if we pull Chatham Elementary out of the regional agreement? So I'm not sure that would actually be a good thing, but it's out there.
Thank you, Nancy. Anything else? You know, the other thing I thought, and I can't remember, Scott, if you brought this up, I can't remember who said it last night, but I think there was another comment about that this is a Cape-wide problem. I mean, right now, yeah, you can move a bunch of Harwich kids over to Chatham and help with the student problem, but you know, this is happening all across the Cape. And at some point, I don't know, will the Harwich kids start running out? Who knows? But yeah, I think it's quite interesting the way, I guess it depends really on where you're sitting on this. Having been privy to the work group meetings, I kind of knew going into the conversation last night where everybody would sit. And I was just kind of curious as to if anybody would cross over into lanes. Kind of speaking, you know, with Joe and Terry and what they said a few minutes ago, I saw a little bit of crossing into lanes. You know, I think both sides get the other's side, but they're concerned about their own side first. And that was when we first started talking about this a couple meetings ago. This is what I was talking about with the domino, because Chatham had made it clear in our work group meetings that in order to get the funding that Harwich was wanting, there needed to be that really close domino. They needed to know what was this long-term solution going to be, because that was the way that they could sell it. And, you know, and then on the Harwich side, they just wanted to know, how are you going to get us money and quickly? So we kind of knew going into that meeting last night, those of us in the work group, where this might go. And I was very surprised, and I'll say this real quickly, I actually received emails from residents of Harwich that was the first time they had heard that information last night. I was really surprised. Now that word's getting out, it's going to be real interesting on the Harwich side and maybe even the Chatham side too. But I guess being a Harwich resident, I'm real curious as to what's going to happen from here the more this gets out. I couldn't believe 3 people that had no idea. That was news to them last night. So so once people start talking about that, it'll be interesting. Terry, go ahead.
You know, we can, I think there's some movement. The final couple of comments by some Chatham board members. So I think that move, maybe in the next couple of weeks, we'll hear something in more of a collaborative way that what if we tried this? That's just my thought process. The irony or the strangeness in this is that you're right, Tina. Both townships have different views on it, and independent of the history of who's gained financially, who has gained learning-wise. One of the members, I think it was Dean, I'm having trouble with his last name, but he made the comment that what they presently know at the moment, he couldn't see the Chatham electorate agreeing to take on a more financial, whether it's $500,000 in order to support their school. And I can kind of see that. I can understand it. On the other hand, I can also understand once the knowledge of what we're experiencing in the Harwich taxpayers, and when the Harwich taxpayers, which I truly believe, other than a few of us, know the story of that attempted to subsidize the smaller school in Chatham is costing the Harwich taxpayers, I would have to say the same thing with Dean. I don't see how they would be able to sit back and say, well, it's worked for 7 years, so what? Not with the pinch that they're feeling too. So if the Chatham folks can't rise to the occasion and say, yeah, we want that school, we want to keep it, and what will it cost us to keep it? Because there's a margin of difference than so far Harwich has been supporting that. Then that makes more sense to me if I lived in Chatham, if I really wanted it, than it does to say, no, let Harwich continue. So it's a dilemma because of what has been for 7 or 8 years.
Thank you. Nancy and then Joanne.
Joanne can go first.
Okay, I just wanted to say that, Nancy, you made a good point last night when you said we've got something here that's really pretty rich and let's not lose it. But at the same time that you were saying that, I agree with you. You really have put together a really nice school district and I'm impressed with it. But on the other hand, I just heard money, money, money. I never heard the kids. Oh, we'll just redistrict that money. We'll turn them over there, money. Both towns have their concerns. They're miles apart. They're miles apart. There's a sentimental feeling about Chatham Elementary School. I can't speak to it. I didn't go there. I just kind of pretty much found out where it was when I got on the school board. I thought I ought to go find out where this school is. And so I did. I went and visited it. But there's the kids, there's a sentimental attachment. I went there when I was a kid. I remember this, we had wonderful this, wonderful that. We need your money. And no one's saying, no, you don't. We went through that motion. We talked about the fact that it's falling on Harwich. But to keep calling it a subsidy, I just think that hurts the process of trying to bring two cultures together. And I think that's what we really have to look at is it worth it? Is it worth to put these two cultures together? And Nancy, you felt very strongly, having been a kid of Chatham Elementary School, that it was worth it. And the high school and the middle school, I mean, I walk into that middle school to sign vouchers and it's alive. It's great. Yeah, you got something good. So I think really we have to work on, yes, I understand you've got the interest of the school and the children and you have a money problem. So to Chatham, their problem is important. To Harwich, their problem is important. It's not mine's more important than yours. If it's your problem, it's more important to you. So that's the only thing I would caution and go back right to what Nancy said is you got something really good here. Let's just watch our words, watch our kids. And let's be careful with our kids. And let's not redistrict them, whatever. My kids were redistricted when they were when we were in Trumbull. That was the way it was, but they were redistricted in their own town. For some reason here, if you say Harwich and you say Chatham, those are light years away for some people. Although they're really not, but they are. And that's all I've got to say about that.
Thank you, Joanne. Nancy, you're next, and then Sharon and Terry. Nancy?
So I'm listening to the conversation and I'm listening to all of the different thoughts and how it's going to help Harwich and how it's going to help Chatham. And I kind of reflect back and say that this is what it was happening 10 years ago or 11 years ago with trying to even come up with regionalization. And they had the hindrance of not having the 8 of us. They had Chatham School Committee and Harwich School Committee talking about it. And then, history for anybody who might be listening that doesn't know it is that Harwich needed a new high school. And the way that they were going to get payment assistance from the MSBA was if they regionalized. Otherwise, they were going to have to pay for a new high school all on their own. And Chatham was looking at, so again, Harwich was looking for financial support by joining up with somebody to help pay for a high school. Chatham was having a kid problem. There weren't enough kids in the schools. And they figured that if they joined in with Harwich, that would help alleviate some of the kid problems, because at the time, the way the per pupil expenditure and the budget was going, because there was so few kids, that per pupil expenditure was just going to start getting more and more out of hand. So yes, the financial savings was not seen in the assessments for Harwich. It was seen in the savings from the high school. And Chatham did see savings, even though the savings weren't really necessary, but the fact that the per pupil was going to get so out of hand if it continued on as it was. So here we are 10 years later, we're still talking about the same thing. We're talking about Harwich is having the financial, they're looking for a cost savings. We've got Chatham and they're looking for kids, or more specifically, a way to maintain Chatham Elementary School. And here we are, the 8 of us, we're already merged. There's no reason why we should be looking back and forth and trying to figure it out. I think the question is, how are we going to, maybe we need to, I'm thinking in terms of my job and in terms of, we need to change the conversation. We won't want to have the conversation, right? The conversation started because of money. You know, that's where it came up. The financial inequity was the conversation. Combined with the financial inequity was the fact that Chatham Elementary doesn't have a lot of children in it. So, but the conversation started with money. If there wasn't a money situation, it probably wouldn't have been brought up right away until Chatham Elementary was just 1 class of kids per grade. So I think we need to change the conversation. I think we need to start focusing more, and Joanne, you alluded to it, and thank you. I wasn't feeling very articulate last night, nor am I feeling very articulate tonight, but I do think we have a good thing going. I think Monomoy has done an outstanding job, and what we have going on in the programs in the schools, it's amazing what we've done in the last 10 years to get this district to where it is today, or not we, but the administrators, the teachers, and the staff. So I think that if we change that conversation and we start now focusing our efforts on the educational program at the elementary schools, and we start focusing it, because our job is the kids. I look at my job, yeah, we have financial obligations to our towns and we have our constituents, but I look at my job is the kids' education first. And how are we going to fix that? How are we going to make that education the best? And then we figure out how we support it and how all of the little pieces fall together. So I think, again, I'll say it, I've said it probably 5 times, we change that focus to the educational program for the elementary schools. And I think that if that happens, it will alter the conversations that are happening at each board to supporting that or not supporting that, or how are we going to support that and how is that going to benefit? Because it is going to come down to money. It always comes down to money, unfortunately. It's the way of the world. But I feel like we need to do our jobs, and our job is educate the kids. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Sharon and then Terry.
So I think that Terry, a couple of meetings ago, or at least 1 meeting ago, spoke about when we drew up this plan, it was a wonderful plan. Maybe I could even think of it like when the Constitution was developed, but everything wasn't thought about. And so the Constitution got some amendments, and that's kind of what we have to do. It's a growing thing. A fixed agreement cannot stay fixed. It has to be flexible to move and grow on things that change and are unforeseen. In addition to that, we have, it's not just Chatham and Harwich. We have, as I think maybe you mentioned, Tina, that we have Chatham parents who have a particular bent. I have a lot of empathy for that. I spent a lot of time over there, and I'm a graduate of the Chatham schools. The people of Chatham, and this would be true of Harwich for Harwich, what they know is what they lived when they went through the schools. These are the people that have been around for a long time in Chatham or Harwich, and what their children, if they've had children there, have done. And then you have a different group of people. You have some people that are maybe on fixed incomes that might have fond memories or not, and they're far away. Their grandchildren are far away, so their interest is not as strong. And then you have the people that have moved to town who love the lower taxes and think should be a summer resort all the time. I'm exaggerating, of course, but you have different factions. Now, traditionally, Chatham and Harwich have both been really good. Up until really the last few years, I have not seen anything in either town except an overall feeling of wanting to support kids. And this, I think, is an ethical situation or a value situation that I'm hoping isn't changing, where we now, as someone said, don't have children, we have no responsibilities. That is the conversation I would like to change, is that these are our children, Chatham, Harwich, if we have kids in school, don't have kids in school, that is part of our civic duty to do. We do have something very good, and we should be proud of it. People are proud in these small towns about their post offices. They're proud of their little downtown areas. They're proud of their libraries. They're both very good libraries. We're proud of all these things. That's what brings value to our communities. So I'm hoping that some of that calling on people's best sides will come out here.
Thank you, Sharon. Terry, hopefully you haven't forgotten your thought.
And this is good for us. It just shows you where we both, as a group of 8, come from in our townships. But words, you know, Joanne, I know, and we've chatted for at least a year now, and it may hit you, and I don't mean it to be, because my little teaching career was all about kids too, and I'm sure the Harwich Elementary principal and those teachers, it's all about their culture, and they love their school just as much, with its great little things and what they've done over the years. And my kids went there and they seem to have turned out fine, just like Chatham Elementary. But I think Chatham, their needs were sort of similar to ours. Yes, they were running out of kids and they were really needy to find a system in which they could move into. And fortunately, we had a need about the condition of our high school. So there seemed to be a match. But Chatham, and you alluded to it, Nance, also had financial problems. They were spending huge amounts of money for tiny classrooms in their high schools, but they weren't able to offer courses that they would have liked to. And it got so that a teacher being brought in as an AP teacher was very, very expensive. It's the old structural deficit thing that we all seem to walk into. You know, someone buys what they think is a used but great BMW, and then they realize the repair bills are killing us at home. And so, oops. So I think there was a financial match to that. And the other thought I had, it wasn't really just a money issue regarding what's come up in the last, say, 6 months to 10 months since last June. Because, and I think you were there, Nance, 3 years ago when Scott presented a budget to the Chatham town meeting for about an hour, I'm sorry, not town meeting, select board member, I happened to be there. And I happened to ask to speak for 2 or 3 minutes, sort of extemporaneous, but the issue was surrounding the elementary school, not so much about per cost of kid, didn't even dawn on me. What I was concerned about was we needed to monitor, at the time, 2 or 3 sections per grade. We needed to carefully monitor that the numbers of kids in the Harwich Elementary per class, let's say 17, 18, 16, 19, was similar with 1 or 2 kids as Chatham was. And there was a danger or concern at that time that that number of 17, 16, 18 could drift down to, say, 12. If that occurred, our Unit A teachers more than willing could have a class grievance, not around money, but around the fact that teacher A in the 3rd grade in Harwich with 17 kids every day, and the teacher in the 3rd grade in Chatham Elementary with, say, 11, making the same amount of money, giving steps in the same amount of hours, that to me, again, is parity, and there would be a real issue. At the time, first Miss Gibbs, I think, didn't want me to speak, And then I gave my little spiel, probably not too little, but it was received in like, thank you very much. And that was that. And so that issue has been, how has that been moderated? Because Scott has attempted to put 3 or 4 school choice kids into some sections and it's calmed down. That became the lesser. At the time, I never even did the figure about how much it costs for a small school with a principal and custodians and the like, which has surfaced in the last year to make that margin. So I think Chatham had that financial issue too, and it's come back to, again, haunt us. So it'll be interesting in the next 6 months to see how we work, because, you know, and Joanne, you say that, and I completely believe it, as well as you, Nancy, and all of us. We're all about kids, but I see our role as an elected official in the school committee, half about improving our kid learning and half about budgeting. Because just as Mike said an hour and a half ago with Charles, there's $640,000 that somehow we agreed that no, we can't push that. Why? Because Howard and Chatham, let's stay with Howard, probably couldn't pass in a town meeting under the circumstances. So I think every year school committees have that balance where you've got to be able to say, what is it that's important about, everything is about the kids. Well, yes, it is. As long as we're able to balance what we can financially think we can do. How do the wealthy take care of that? They send them to their academy at $51,000 a year, or they send them to Shadow or wherever. So that's the other extreme where some people have solutions. So what we're dealing with, I think, and I agree with everyone, we have come a long way, partially and mostly because of the Scott's efforts and his leadership team. So we've made some really great strides, really solid principles and good programs. So we've got a lot of pat on the backs if we want to say, yeah, so far, so good. This is a stumbling block. And somehow or other, we just got to figure a way to work it out. And it's going to take both towns. It's Chatham Select Board to say, hey, I think we can do this. And then we and Howard, they'll say, thank you. And then we as a committee say, and here are the 3 plans we have to move some kids around and make it the best 2 elementary schools. And then life goes on. But yeah, it's you know, I was just jotting down here. Yeah, the money really does stink. But when it gets to the point where it's $12,000 for a kid in Howard and $17,000 for a kid in Chatham, it gives you pause.
Thank you, Terry. I wanted to just say something, and then Meredith, if you've got any thoughts, I want to hear them. But I just had an idea. I'm just going to throw this out because I've heard a couple of people say that we have to change the conversation. And I think all of us are here about educating the kids. But something I've been thinking about, and I had this thought about 20 minutes ago, and then Nancy said something, and I was like, yeah. When I first heard of the 365 initiative in Chatham, I thought it was brilliant. And I don't know, I've tried to keep up and follow where they've been going with that. And I'm assuming it's hitting some roadblocks. But I started thinking about, why just Chatham 365? Why not Monomoy 365? You know, having to change the conversation and talking about families. We care about our students, but we also care about our families. And when I sat on the playground committee for Harwich, one of the things I was really amazed is that everybody that sat around the table of the playground committee came from different parts of the town. But we all had this common goal of building this playground. And so I'm sitting here thinking, if we're going to change the conversation, I'm going back to what Joe said last night about educating other people's kids. We all agree that that's the right thing to do. I'm not convinced that a big group in Harwich will agree with us. They probably really don't care. And there might be a group in Chatham that really don't care because they just want their senior center. But if we start talking about families, because if you're talking about families and keeping families here and keeping kids here, families are going to stay and invest in the community, spend money. It starts to become an economic conversation. So I kind of am brainstorming in a big way here that I want to give some thought to changing the conversation and coming at it through the lens of what 365 Initiative has tried to do, but making it about Monomoy and keeping our families here, because right now families are leaving Chatham, but it's not going to be too much longer before they start leaving Harwich. So I'm kind of thinking on a bigger scale as we move forward, and even reaching out into the community. It's one of these forums. I would love to talk about how do we keep our families in these two towns? Because we as a school committee have talked about childcare. I know that we've got domestic violence situations happening. We've got some kids coming into our schools from some pretty traumatic scenarios. You know, there's a whole lot when you start looking at families that people deal with every day. And I think this might be a door into a larger conversation. So I'm just kind of throwing that out there for right now, because like it or not, families are a minority in Harwich and Chatham. And how do we change the conversation to convince people to invest? Because that's what we're talking about, spending money, make the investment in a minority population. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Anybody else before we close this out? Meredith, yes, I want to hear from Meredith.
Just 2 cents. So kind of being the newest member, I definitely did a lot of listening last night. I feel just in the conversations that I've had outside of meetings, that the two towns have been talking about these issues separately. Harwich has always been talking about the money issue. Chatham knows that the population of students are decreasing. I mean, it's not a secret. So I thought that, you know, having the working group get put together this year, and, you know, being an active group, and then having this joint meeting last night is really the beginning of that conversation. But I think it's going to take a little bit. Like, I don't think it's an instant change. And I think that, you know, changing the conversation, you know, so that it's not my problem and your problem is a great approach. But I think that it's going to take more joint meetings. And I think the working group is going to, you know, be working on this and try to make change, because we are a district and we are a strong district that has been built, you know, over these, 9 years now, 8 years, to become what it is. So I think we've got some great programs. We've got some great curriculum that's in there. We, you know, all of the opportunities that our kids have are wonderful. So I hope that, you know, we can work together, but I do think just, you know, being an active listener last night, that it's definitely the beginning of the conversation. But I think all members that were there last night are willing to continue the conversation. And I think that is one of the most important parts that I heard. So those are my 2 cents. I don't say a lot, but.
Thank you, Meredith. Jackie, we want to hear from Jackie. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I did also I just wanted to listen last night. It was a unique opportunity to have everybody in the room at once, and just kind of observe, listen, understand, see the different points of view. And then tonight again, I haven't really said much, maybe my facial expressions say it all, but just kind of intriguing listening to everybody again and reiterating things that folks said last night, reiterating what the other board members said last night. And kind of what I've gathered is that we obviously have two very different, strong, opinionated sides between the two towns. It is fact of the matter, it is financial, and then it is closing an elementary school and or Chatham's fiscal responsibility to its students, whether we increase that or not. And I don't think there's any way you can banter, argue, chew it, slice it, dice it. Those are the two issues on the table. And I think that after the meeting last night, it became apparent to me that although we as a board feel that there is a need for a change in the assessment, And I think we felt that we were going to be the kind of liaisons between the two boards. It's become more apparent to me that we may in fact have to initiate the proposal to the town of Chatham to then go back to the town of Harwich with, because I think that if we don't initiate it from the middle, we are going to elongate this process. So I think that maybe a more productive use of our time, a productive use of our time. And I know for me, one of the things I'm struggling with is, well, will there be an increase in assessment to Chatham in the budget to help subsidize Harwich with the money that they're looking for, but on the back burner is the Chatham Elementary School. So if we get rid of the Chatham Elementary School altogether and we move into the Harwich Elementary School, that's a whole other conversation. And I think that it's very convoluted for the general public to be talking about these two topics together, even though we understand how entwined they are. And I think we have to be really careful in our public forums, the topics that we're talking about, because they can very loosely get confused as one issue, and they're not. They are two issues that are on the table. And we've pointed out tonight, like I think Nancy and Scott were going back and forth about, will it be a one-year assessment for the elementary school? Well, no, it would actually be an increase every year, whether you have the elementary school or not in some form. So I think we need to figure out, before we even go into our next community forum, what is the topic we're talking about, and what are some of the, and we need to come up with some kind of a proposal to go with to Chatham to start making this seem more appealing. And I think the Chatham Elementary School, I'm not quite sure where to tie it in, because that's where you're going to get all of your energy from the community, is about the Chatham Elementary School. And I don't think you're going to see as much with that small, with a group of taxpayers in Chatham that don't want to pay that extra $540,000. Honestly, that's my opinion. And there may be that group out, and that we've just never seen them because it's never really been financially impactful on our budget in my eyes. I just think that we're going back and forth. We're all talking about the same things over and over and over again, and we're not getting anywhere either. So we as a board really need to decide, how are we going to approach the next couple months? And I think we need to be a little bit more proactive with narrowing it down, working with the working group, and starting to come up with if the immediate need is Harwich needing financial aid, I guess we want to call it, that's what we're working on. And Chatham Elementary is on the back burner. But when you put Chatham Elementary on the back burner, the town of Chatham needs to understand that that's still going to come up. And how is that then going to impact them financially? So I guess maybe I'm just the one struggling with this, but I see it's two different issues, but it's all mixed into one thing. And you're going to get mixed emotions. You're going to get facts mixed up. It just seems like it's going to be a disaster if we don't pull it together, streamline it, and figure out how we're going to approach our next community forums, and then how we're going to approach the selectmen again. I mean, I think the meeting last night was great, but Harwich has their mind made up. Chatham has their mind made up. So we didn't get anywhere by being in the middle, other than bringing them both to the table, which was good. But Chatham has no motivation to move, and Harwich has motivation that they want to move. So I'm kind of struggling with, I guess we really need to be the facilitators, I guess is what I'm saying.
Thank you, Jackie. Joe, and then Terry. Go ahead, Joe.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, because rarely does anybody change their mind in the middle of a conversation, a debate, or an argument. Usually at that point, folks are fixed on presenting their position as clearly, as vigorously as they possibly can. Minds don't change during the back and forth. Minds change later, when people think about what they've heard, maybe consider a reply in a calmer time, in a quieter moment. They reflect on the arguments that they've heard, and they try to consider those. I'm hoping that's going on right now with the select board in Chatham, the members of the select board in Chatham, particularly. Even as we are speaking, hopefully there is some thinking going on among the select board, and they are trying to find some ways to address the need that was articulated by Harwich. And hopefully people in Harwich are thinking and realizing that Chatham may very well be a really good partner in this. Hopefully that sense is more deeply and better understood, so that a tendency to, a potential tendency in the future to have demonstrations in downtown Harwich with people carrying signs saying, stop the subsidy. Maybe that trend has been halted a little bit, and we won't see that in the future. That would be a good thing. So I'm hoping that there is some rethinking now, some starting to move thinking that resulted from yesterday. And that part of it was positive. The product of it we'll see in the future. I'm hoping, and I think there's some realization that could be true. I heard a little, enough to at least to get me encouraged. But I want to say something that hasn't really come up. It was a remarkable statement by a school committee member last night, and she said that she does not look at the 8 of us and think who is from Chatham and who is from Harwich, that she'll listen to what folks say and respond to the idea, agree with some and disagree with others, but do so on the basis of the idea rather than the origin by town of the person presenting an idea. That's remarkable. That's really important. I fear that we could lose that. And it would be a terrible thing if we were like other regional boards in other regionalized districts, where it's very clear what side you're on, and sometimes people arrange themselves accordingly by seating. I had, and my last point, second to last point, I had a chance to, really privileged to be an adjunct teacher in the first year of regionalization. And I taught one class for 2 semesters for a full year. And it was pretty obvious to me I was teaching Chatham students and I was teaching Monomoy students. And that's not the direction that Bill Burkhead wanted to go or Janie Girolamo wanted to go. And then I left and I came back a few years later to do day-by-day subbing. And it was abundantly clear to me that I was teaching Monomoy students. That Chatham-Harwich distinction had disappeared. It had been melded into something called Monomoy. It had melted into a whole kind of shark mentality. I had a chance to talk to Assistant Principal Girolamo about this, and she very strongly reiterated the point and rattled off, 4 or 5 examples of it. The students' consciousness has changed. They see themselves as a group together. And I'm only talking the high school because that's the only place where I've worked. You don't want me subbing in an elementary school. But that sense, that developed consciousness, that change of a Monomoy identity and establishing that firmly, to lose that would be a terrible loss. And I hope that everything that we do as a school district, as a school committee, as well as the select board and the board of selectmen, will be to take efforts that preserve all the ground that has been gained in the last decade. And finally, I have to kind of apologize a bit. The phrase "other people's children" comes from a book written in the mid-90s by African-American educator named Lisa Delpit. A terrific book, and I kind of lifted the phrase and appropriated it as my own. And if I'm going to get praised for it, as I said the other day, my inner Catholic comes out, and so now I'm feeling the obligation to confess to my sins.
Thank you, Joe. Terry, go ahead.
Let me take 2 minutes and then we need to move on because I think this has been a good, worthwhile 20 minutes too. But responding to Joe briefly, I too had the sense, not a great deal, 30–40% were on the move, but I had a sense at the end of last evening's meeting that there would be a movement independent of us. And I could be biased, but I think at the tail end of the last 15 to 20 minutes, when Michael and Scott maybe gave the figures back again to Peter and to Dean, there seemed to be an interest in regathering on their part to say, let us look at that. So that's maybe optimistic for me. One thing I would say to everybody, and the 8 of us are learning along with the 2 towns. Up until about a year ago, none of us, and I've done a lot of homework on this, none of us knew the disparity of the cost per child in the Howard Elementary in Chatham. I didn't know anything about that at all. I thought it was no issue. And the only thing I worried about as a member of the school committee was that as they shrunk in numbers in their class, it may cause an issue with the Howard Elementary staying at around 17 or 18. And I'm repeating myself from 15 minutes ago. That was my worry. I didn't come to this, nor I think did anybody else, absent maybe Scott, that the key and main issue that has surfaced is a disparity that now is so large. I think in terms simply, if you took, and I know hardly anyone in the town of Howard knows about this, and I'm assuming Chatham the same way. If you took a typical 3rd grade Howard Elementary School mom and dad and sat them down next to a 3rd grade mom and dad in Chatham, sat them with them too, and had Scott and Michael there and walked them through just the financial support. It doesn't happen at the high school in the middle, because that's per kid exactly the same. Both groups would be stunned and surprised. They wouldn't know. And the Howard parent, I would like to think if it's, say, I'm off, but if it's 13,000 and 17,000 or 13 and 18, that $5,000 would be a major concern for them. That it's not that Howard and Jackie, I appreciate your comment on that, because there are that issue. It's not so much Howard needs financial aid. It's the aid that Howard has given to keep the Chatham school open of the difference between 12,000 and 17. That represents the 500,000. And last year it was 450,000. The year before that, 350,000. That was the money that our budget, and we've given silent permission for Scott to continue that. That's the difference of the money. That if I were that 3rd grade mom and dad, I'd say, whoa, I didn't know that. Oh, because most schools in the districts and towns, they try to keep the parity of kid costs within a period of, I was start out $800, $900, one to the other, and none of us took notice of that. So we're all learning this in a delayed sort of way, and hopefully in the next 6 months, we'll see some movement towards correcting that issue. And the irony to me is one town is helping the other town financially when the town that's helping, their kids' cost is so much lower, meaning 11 or 12,000 versus 17,000. And it calls for a correction. So who does it? I think it really now is in the hands of the Select Board of Chatham and the Select Board of Howard, with Scott and Michael helping them with numbers and see,
Thank you, Terry. So we'll move on, but I always think as I scan this room, this Zoom room, I think I'm probably the only one. Joanne and Joe, I don't really know about you. I think I'm the only one without roots here. And so I think I see this very, very differently. Joe, yeah, I mean, I have 0 roots. I didn't even vacation here. So yeah, so I think I just see this really differently. And it's always really interesting to me to get all the dynamics and to understand how all this works, because I tend to think really big and wide in my lens, but I have to kind of bring myself back down sometimes and because we definitely have two issues and we do have to address those issues. And at the same time, I see something bigger and grander happening out of this, but that's another conversation for another time. So we'll move on to the next item. Actually, pooled testing. So let's move to Scott.
So yesterday I did a series of informational sessions, one for elementary staff, then one for middle and high school staff, and last night for parents to talk about something that we're going to put in place after the February vacation in an attempt to try to make our schools safer for students and staff. And it's pooled testing that the Department of Ed and Department of Public Health are paying for. So it's free to schools up until March 28th. So we theoretically should be able to get in 5 pooled samples. We can only test individuals who grant consent or whose parents have granted consent. So, so we've invited our staff and our students to participate. There's a nice little video that I put in the communications out to families that shows the exact company that we are paired with by the state, which is this company called Concentric by Ginkgo. And they piloted this science because, I mean, this is all very new, with COVID, this is all very new to everybody. So, so these companies were trying to come up with ways to do effective, cost-effective genetic testing. And they piloted with a middle school in Salem, Massachusetts. And, so the video, has the Salem superintendent and the Salem middle school principal and some teachers, and the school nurse are featured in the video. But they also, show, really how a teacher or 2 teachers are introducing, the pooled testing to students and what becomes of it. So a lot of credit to our nurses. One of our nurses, Amy Sullivan, at the middle school, called the nurse at in Salem to just ask, just what was involved, and how they have been doing this in Salem. It doesn't involve the nurses. It happens in the classrooms, and the way these tests are designed is that students 2nd grade and above can self-administer the test. So they pull their mask down just ever so slightly, take a swab that's provided, and they gently swab just the inside of each nostril. And I had a parent call me yesterday, worried that, that this swabbing was one of the brain ticklers we've all heard about with COVID testing that, go way up there. But this is not that. This is a gentle, just inside the nostril swab. After the student swabs themselves, they deposit their swab into this communal collection tube, and that's the pool. So, so there's a lot of work that's being done behind the scenes, where Tony London in central office is compiling all of the consent forms that we're getting from parents and from staff, so that we can make up a list of who would be in a particular pool, and each one of those, the collection tubes is barcoded to a set of individuals in a classroom or within a school building, so that we can go and determine who is in the pool if one of those samples comes back positive. The interesting thing, when Amy reached out to the Salem Middle School, is they have been doing this and none of their pools have come back positive. So, so that's a good thing, but it's, it also, we also have to be prepared for what if a pool does come back positive. So the idea here with pooled testing is that ideally it's going to catch some individuals who are in that asymptomatic stage of COVID. So with regard to COVID, there's a period of time when you catch the virus initially, and the virus starts to replicate, within you. And there's about 2 to 3 days before any sort of symptoms start to manifest themselves, where an individual doesn't even know that they're sick yet, but they are actually starting to be infectious. And that's why this is such a challenging virus to go deal with, is that you're infectious before you actually have any sort of symptoms. And so this pooled testing has the ability to hopefully catch some more individuals who aren't yet realizing that they're ill, and have us intervene earlier before they can spread and have this go to more individuals. Ideally, in areas that have done pooled testing and have done it weekly for a month, they've seen a 50 to 60% decrease in the positivity, within a community. So if we can see that happen and start depressing some of the COVID numbers that we've been seeing in our students, ideally, this is actually going to lead to more in-person learning and less quarantining, by catching some things earlier on. So if we have a positive pool, we've also, I've shared with the committee before, we did all the paperwork. So we have on hand in all of our elementary schools, we have on hand plenty of these Abbott Labs Binax Now rapid antigen tests. So our nurses have the tests and have the PPE to administer tests should we need. These pooled tests are designed to have, if a sample comes back positive, and there will be 5 to 25 individuals that are in that collection tube, we would go and use these rapid tests and rapid test the individuals who were in the pool. And ideally, the rapid test would go and allow us to determine who is truly the positive person in that pool, so that we can either notify the staff member or notify that student's family that we have a positive. We would still continue the same approach that we've been using for quarantining, because you have to keep in mind that these pools are based on a classroom. So whoever is positive in a classroom and has been with a teacher and a group of students. So we would still quarantine that group, but ideally be able to intervene a little bit earlier than we would, had we not done any sort of testing. So, so the hope is that we can, at least protect our students more, protect our staff more. It is a logistical headache, and it's a lot of work that Tony's putting in behind the scenes, and that Joy's putting in behind the scenes, and just a lot of research on this. At the moment, it seems like we're the only school district on Cape Cod that's going to be trying this from the get-go. I think there's some others that are sitting back and waiting to see what it looks like for us. So I think as of today, I think Barnstable has decided to wait on it, but won't be the first time that we've trailblazed something. So we'll try, and I, it likely has its best results if we get the vast majority of students and staff to buy in. But even if we get even 50%, doing something is better than nothing. And I know that for even my own daughter, I think she's really excited to be part of this. She wants to know if she's positive or negative anytime, and I think to have her know each week and get word that the pool came back negative, I think provides a level maybe assurance that I think I think so many of us these days are just sort of grasping for, some sort of certainty and some sort of knowledge as we kind of all get through this pandemic together. So I think for her, this is, maybe some sort of a good thing to help ease some of her anxiety through all of this. And hopefully that can be something that can ease a lot of staff and students' anxiety as we go through this too. So anyway, I'll just pause there and open it up to any sort of questions about pooled testing. Lord knows I got a lot of questions yesterday and was answering a lot of questions about it over, I think, 3 hours yesterday.
Any questions, comments, anyone? Terry, go ahead.
2 things. Scott, what's the usual turnaround time for test results? And the second, what would be your gauge regarding the 30 or 40 or 50 parents that you chatted with yesterday?
So the turnaround results, we should get results within about 2 days. So 1 to 2 days we would know back from the company. I think in terms of what we were seeing, even while the school committee meeting's been going on tonight, I've gotten a couple emails from parents, and and the communication that's come my way has been all over. I would say in many ways all over the political spectrum, because I think I think COVID has been politicized in so many different ways, and so one of the emails that I got this evening was concerned about quarantining and the conservative stance that the school district has taken with regard to quarantining as we've been going through this. And another parent was just reaching out and just wanting more information. So I think we've had I think the parents last night were generally supportive, and I think there are some that are just just wondering how's it going to impact them. I think what parents want to hear is that the quarantining isn't going to impact their child. I think we're at this place where on the Cape, COVID rates have been declining, but we're not seeing that decline in positive rates in the school system, particularly at the middle school and Chatham Elementary School. And so the hope is, my hope is that February vacation is going to help sort of the ship right itself, and that maybe this pooled testing on the other side can go get us into a more reasonable norm, because we've had a tough go recently with regard to cases, and I think we need to I think a lot of parents want to see their kids in person and are just concerned. I think a concern some parents that I know have is, will pooled testing mean that we're going to have more people quarantined because we're finding positive cases in our school? And I understand that concern, but the reality is, if we didn't find the positive cases, they potentially are going to make more positive cases by spreading it, and then we're just going to be quarantining far more than we would had we done nothing.
Thank you, Scott. And anybody else, questions, comments? Joe.
There really isn't a point on the agenda for this, but I've maybe something to look into, or maybe some others at home can check. But apparently we've stopped streaming on channel 22 in Chatham. At least that's what I've heard from my family in any case. And I'm not sure if that's actually a technical error in my house where such errors do occur, or if it's actually the case. So it's something to look into in the next couple of days or so, if that's really the case.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry to get off track, but it just came up.
We'll take a look at it. I can tell you we are still live streaming on our YouTube channel, but channel 22, I don't know. We'll look into it though. Leah?
May I just say something? I did speak to Steve Cass about that. That upgrade that we were approved to receive will help us with that synchronous live stream to channel 22. They pick up educational content, but it was going to restream this morning and this afternoon on channel 22, so it's in their programming. But we had provided both the Zoom link and the YouTube link for people to participate, for board members, and the YouTube to watch the live stream.
Thank you. All right, back to poll testing. Anybody comment or question? Okay, Scott, thank you as always for all the efforts to keep our schools open and our kids and staff safe. Much appreciated. And keep blazing that trail. So moving on into subcommittee reports, legislative liaison report. I'll make this very quickly. I just sent an invitation. I'm attending, or Scott and I are attending, the legislative breakfast tomorrow, Cape Cod Collaborative and Mask, co-do it every year. And I was asked to join a panel. I think I might have all of 3 minutes to speak, but because we have created our equity task force, they wanted me to just speak about that because they're going to have an afternoon dialogue about racial equity and how schools are addressing it. So I will have about three or 4 minutes, I think, to just draw some attention to the good work that we've already been doing. So I look forward to that. And anybody can go if they want. It's virtual this year, of course. So everything will be virtual tomorrow. So let me know if you want to go, and I can make sure you get registered quickly because it starts at 8:30 in the morning. Any comments, questions? All right, moving on to first. Now this is listed as a first reading, but I think it's more of a discussion. And Sharon, I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, to lead us. And if everybody's got a survey or kind of some questions that policy had a conversation about a particular policy. So Sharon, do you want to take on this? And you'll need to take yourself off mute, Sharon.
Well, when we were talking about this before, it looked like we were just talking about transportation and the date of dealing with school choice, but that in fact is not the case, because Scott had brought up that we were putting something in there that wasn't actually the practice that had been happening for school choice. So Melissa McGuire suggested that we may want to talk about what would be our school committee's goal and intentions for school choice, and more specifically, if we should happen to need preferences. There's different things like, I wasn't aware that we were not treating Chatham and Harwich as like residents of the other town. Of course, they're not residents of the other town, but because we were a region, if we had school choice, we've been talking about the elementary school, and Chatham person wanted to go to Harwich Elementary or the other way around. Right, presently, they're in the same category as if somebody from Orleans or Yarmouth wanted to come. I have my own particular feelings about that. Then there's lots of things by law. There's something about siblings. So, for instance, if one sibling lived in Yarmouth and another one lived with a parent here locally, that sibling may have preference, but then it doesn't include like step siblings. If parents have been remarried, even if they're living with the child that has been accepted. So at any rate, there are different things that pertain to biological versus household members. And then in addition to the Chatham Harwich thing, there's also the issue of if one of our staff members that work in the schools lives in another town, not Chatham or Harwich, and it would be most advantageous for them, and they're working in the schools, to bring their child here, where in the pecking order would that fall? So as far as I can see, those are the particulars. And like Tina said, this is not, we're not going to be voting tonight, but there are some things that our little subcommittee actually agreed on, the Chatham Harwich situation. But rather than go into what we thought, it might be a good time to just hear any thoughts that any of you have thought about.
Jackie, go ahead.
Tina, I would suggest kind of like what we talked about at our subcommittee, that because this actually isn't a first reading, that this maybe would be better approached as under reports and discussions as a main topic one evening, because as we started to talk about this as a subcommittee, it's a very large topic that will have a lot of conversation, and there's a lot of decisions to be made before we can even start working on the policy. I'm thinking it's probably bigger than its spot tonight in our agenda, and that I don't know that we, at this point at 9:30, can give it our full energy, and it's due actually at this point, because it's a much larger, and I think that we could also probably target a little bit closer in our report and discussion about what specifically we want to ask the committee to talk about, and that would help us better formulate our policy.
Exactly. Thank you, Jackie. Nancy, did you have your hand up?
I kept trying to click the mute button, but it wasn't clicking right. My mouse is dying. It's dying about as much as I am right now. I'm so tired. But so yeah, I was actually going to say the exact same thing as Jackie, is that this is a huge conversation, and at 9:30 at night, I'm spent. And also, because it's listed as a first reading, we can't discuss it. It's only supposed to be a report. So there was, I think what Sharon did was perfect. She reported out from the subcommittee, but then it needs to be moved into a different portion of our agenda, especially because I think there could be parents out there that have input and they want to be able to share that with us as well. So it needs to be a discussion item, not a report.
Thank you. And I would agree with that. So we will bring this back. In fact, I guess for right now, we'll just move it to the next agenda. We'll take a look at how that's shaping up. But yeah, I think just for everybody's sake, the policy subcommittee, we were a little shocked, or at least I will speak for myself, that Harwich, I just assumed that Harwich and Chatham, I don't know. Anyway, you can take a look at this. So I'm just going to invite you to read it. And we'll be back in touch, I guess, with that survey we were talking about, and put it on the next agenda. Yeah, we've all had a busy week. I know there's been a lot of meetings this week, and I think we're all like, so we'll put it on the next agenda. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the importance of having policies is that in the absence of a policy, and I think the key thing here is, and why I was adding things in there is in terms of for the subcommittee to look at is in the absence of a policy on school choice, and whether so state law says that that we should follow whatever the intra-district procedure is, and there's not a policy that's defining what whether there's a preference one way or the other. So so in the absence of a policy, when we have to be in a lottery situation, we're having to deal with it based on what the existing or lack thereof of a policy is. So so what we've been doing here, or what I did here, is just to come up with the scenarios that you could imagine we might face in a lottery, and make sure that that we're following, that we come up with with sort of a clearly laid out, here's how we'd go and deal with a lottery situation, because that's really where this comes in.
Thank you, Scott. I'll just add real quickly, just for future meeting, to take a look, and I'm actually doing my digital packet tonight, so I don't have a hard copy. But for those of you, I guess it was maybe next to the last page in our packet, if you would kind of do a little bit of homework between now and the next meeting. There's a question on the second, next to last page. It says, is there a need to add a line rank ordering priority preference? And I would like you to give some thought to this between now and the next meeting. It gives you kind of a multiple choice that if there's let's just say what Scott said, if there's a lottery, we've got a slot open, who gets the slot? Who gets the priority, A, B, or C? And I want everybody to just take some time to really think about this so we can have a good discussion. Because like I said, those of us in the policy committee were surprised that I just automatically thought Harwich and Chatham always got priority because we're Monomoy, but that's not the case. So anyway, give some thought, do your homework if you would, and just really read through this so we can have a good discussion, and we'll try to get it early on the agenda next time. All righty, thank you. And moving on to Superintendent's report.
I'll be very short, given the hour, but I just want to give I don't have any recognitions for tonight, other than just a quick, I want to just compliment Michael on his putting together the budget presentation. I think the slide deck that people saw during the public hearing, I think was very solid, but what's really great is Michael has a complete narrative that goes with each one of those slides so that we can put this up on the website, and there is a complete presentation that people can read. So I thought it was really nicely done, Michael, for your first go around. In terms of the COVID update, just where we stand year to date, we have, and this is as of yesterday, we've had another one today, but as of yesterday, we have had at Chatham Elementary since the start of the school year, 10 students and 3 staff who have been positive. Harwich Elementary, 8 students, 2 staff. And at the middle school, 16 students, 3 staff. And the high school, 20 students, 2 staff. For a grand total of 54 students, 10 staff. But you see there in that, just that Chatham Elementary has had more than Harwich Elementary. So a school almost the third the size of Harwich Elementary has had more cases, and many of those cases have come up in the last couple of weeks. And that's why we were put in a situation that had we kept Chatham Elementary School open this week, we probably would have only had 3 in-person classes with some children in the room. And, and that all of the other ones would have had somebody positive in the room, in the last 2 weeks, that created this quarantine situation. And because many of those children at Chatham Elementary School have siblings at the middle school or high school, you end up having, sort of household spread that we've seen, that then has impacted the middle school. So the middle school right now, I believe as of today, we had a new case that probably has the middle school now, as we close out and head into February vacation, having less than 50% of the in-person students. Again, I think very connected to what's happening at Chatham Elementary School. Harwich Elementary School has been in a really good place. There have only been a couple cases, I think 3 cases in the last couple of weeks, but still it's all, it's amazing how different the 2 towns can be. Chatham is very much in the red zone on the state charts right now, and again, my hope is that we're seeing cases go down on the Cape. It's just at the moment, locally, we've got a little blip that that needs to correct itself. And my hope is that the pooled testing that I was talking about earlier might be able to provide some relief for our communities in that too.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Oh, I don't know any questions or comments? All right, seeing none. The presentation of warrants, because we are fully remote tonight, Joanne has signed on our behalf to keep things moving. And so the warrants for tonight will be presented at the next meeting for signature. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Oh, it sounds like we had a bit of a twinning jinx there. All right, so we'll take it from Jackie and the second by Nancy. And we'll go around and roll call to adjourn, starting with Terry.
Aye.
Thank you. Joe.
Osceola, yes.
Thank you, Joanne.
Yes.
Jackie. Nancy.
Aye.
Meredith.
Aye.
Sharon.
Aye.
And I'm an aye. So we are officially adjourned at 9:43 p.m. Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye. Thank you.
Ugh.